Hello everyone, you're listening to Sleepwalker Radio. If our stories help you sleep or relax, please like, comment, and subscribe. Now close your eyes, and let's begin. I had been living in my first apartment for about 2 weeks. It wasn't much, but it was mine. A basement apartment, cheap because there was no patio, and probably because of how dark and damp it could get sometimes. But at 23 and fresh out of college, cheap was all I could afford. The apartment had 2 small bedrooms, old carpeting that smelled faintly of mildew when it rained, and tiny windows that sat right at ground level. When you looked out, you didn't see the sky, you saw dirt, grass, and if people walked by, you saw their legs and shoes. Sometimes just seeing those passing feet reminded me how low I was to the ground, how close to anyone or anything that decided to stop. I slept in one of the bedrooms with the blinds drawn tightly shut. That was my little safe space where I could block out the world above. The other bedroom, though, was empty except for some spare boxes I hadn't unpacked yet. That room had a window with water damage around the frame. When I moved in, the landlord said maintenance would come by soon to fix it, so I left the blinds all the way up to let the wood and wall air out as much as possible. The window had swollen a bit from the moisture, and sometimes I'd catch myself staring at it, wondering if it would ever get repaired. Most nights were uneventful. I worked during the day and spent my evenings settling in, unpacking boxes bit by bit, or watching shows to fill the quiet. The apartment complex itself was older, and the walls were thin. I'd hear my upstairs neighbors walking around, or the occasional slam of a door. The sounds became background noise, part of the place. The street outside wasn't busy, but now and then, I'd hear people coming or going at odd hours, normal city life stuff. I thought I was getting used to it. That night started no differently. I had stayed up watching some show on my laptop. Nothing particularly gripping, just something to have on. Around midnight, I finally turned it off, brushed my teeth, and got into bed. The apartment felt cooler than usual. I remember pulling my blanket up high, getting comfortable, and listening for those familiar sounds. The pipes creaking a little, the faint hum of the fridge from the kitchen. I must have fallen asleep quickly, because the next thing I remember was waking up. It wasn't the slow kind of waking where you drift up out of sleep. It was like my body suddenly knew something wasn't right. My eyes opened wide, and I was fully alert in an instant. My heart felt heavy in my chest, and I could feel my pulse in my ears. I didn't move at first. I just lay there, trying to figure out why I was awake, what had set me off. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, and the screen lit up, 4:03 a.m. The light was bright in the dark room, and it made me feel more alone somehow. I turned my head towards the window by my bed. The blinds were closed tight, like always. But then I saw it, a dark shape right outside, large and unmoving. My stomach flipped. The shadow was blocking part of the faint light that usually came from the street lamp across the road. And then I saw the beam of a flashlight. The light cut through the darkness, moving slowly, trying to pierce through the gaps in the blinds. It wasn't random or hurried. The person outside was trying to see in. My breathing got shallow. I froze, staring at that shape, my mind racing with what I should do. For a few long seconds, I couldn't move. My body felt like it was made of stone. Then, the survival part of my brain kicked in. I forced myself to move, as quietly as I could, sliding off the bed and grabbing the small hunting knife I kept in the nightstand. It wasn't much, just something I'd brought with me when I moved, but it was all I had. I held it tight, the handle cold in my palm, and crept towards the door of my bedroom. The apartment was so silent I could hear the floor creak under my bare feet as I stepped into the short hallway. I moved slowly, trying to steady my breathing, trying to think. The other bedroom, the one with the uncovered window, that's where they'd have the clearest view inside. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I inched towards that room, staying close to the wall, and when I got near the doorway, I risked a quick glance around the corner. What I saw made my blood run cold. The figure was right outside that window, big, broad-shouldered, wearing heavy boots that crunched softly on the gravel and dirt. The flashlight beam swept across the floor of the empty room, moving slowly, like they were searching for something specific. I could hear the faint jingle of keys at their waist, and for a second, I thought maybe they were trying to see if anyone was inside before breaking in. My grip on the knife tightened. I felt small, trapped, like there was no way out. There was just me and this person who could break through that window or door at any moment. I didn't dare move or make a sound. My mind ran through everything I knew about the apartment. No back door, no other way out. Just the front door locked, with no peephole, no chain, nothing but a single deadbolt between me and whoever was outside. I thought about calling someone, but I didn't want to make a sound. I didn't want to give away that I was standing right there, frozen in fear. Then, like it was meant to happen at that exact moment, my phone buzzed in my hand. The vibration felt like thunder in the quiet. I looked down at the screen, and my heart skipped. It was a text from a friend who worked for the police. It said simply, "What's going on at your apartment?" That was it. No explanation. Just that one question. My stomach dropped. Somehow, they knew something was happening. That had to mean it was serious, right? I felt a wave of panic rise again. Was this guy about to come in? Were the cops already aware of him? I didn't answer right away. I was too focused on the figure outside. But then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, they started to move. I watched as the light shifted, the beam angled away from the floor, and the person turned. They didn't run. They didn't even seem in a hurry. They just walked off, slow and steady, the keys still jingling softly with each step until they disappeared into the night. I stood there in the dark, listening. Every part of me was shaking. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to move. I texted my friend back, told him what I'd seen, asked what was going on. But there was no answer. I stood in the middle of my small apartment, feeling like the walls were closing in. I didn't want to look out the window. I didn't want to open the door. I didn't want to do anything except disappear into the floor. After what felt like forever, I went back to my bedroom. I didn't turn on a light. I just lay down on my bed, knife still in hand, and stared up at the ceiling. I tried to listen for any sound that would tell me the person had come back, but all I could hear was my own heart, still racing, still loud in my ears. I lay there waiting, hoping that somehow the night would end and morning would come. But it wasn't over. About 5 minutes later, just when I thought maybe it was safe, there was a knock at the door. Not a gentle knock, not a polite tap. It was loud, forceful, like someone trying to break it down. My body went cold all over again. I stayed frozen for a second, then got up and stood near the door, knife ready. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it the same person? Had they circled back? Were they trying to trick me into opening the door? I didn't have a peephole. No chain. Just that single deadbolt. I felt exposed, vulnerable. I didn't know what to do. But then I thought, if this is someone trying to get in, I need to make noise, wake up the neighbors, make it harder for them to do anything. So I shouted as loud as I could. "Who is it?" My voice cracked a little, but it was loud, and it echoed down the hallway. For a second, there was nothing. No sound, no response. Then a voice, softer than I expected, said it was the police. My mind went in a dozen directions at once. Was it really the cops? Or was it the person outside, trying to trick me? I didn't answer. I just stood there, silent, trying to think. The voice came again, saying I wasn't in trouble, that they just needed to talk to me. I hesitated. I didn't want to open the door. I didn't want to trust it. But something about the voice, and the fact that my friend had texted earlier, made me think it was real. I opened the door just a crack, knife still in hand, ready to slam it shut if I had to. I saw 2 officers, both standing a bit back from the door. One was at the bottom of the steps, and the other was partway up. They had their hands visible, no weapons drawn, and they looked apologetic, maybe? Like they knew they'd scared me half to death. One of them spoke, explained that they had been the ones outside, looking in, that they hadn't meant to frighten me. They were investigating something. I stood there, shaking, not knowing whether to yell or cry. My body finally let go of the tension, and I felt tears sting my eyes, the adrenaline leaving me all at once. I felt small, embarrassed, relieved, and angry all at the same time. Later, I found out the full story. A neighbor in the complex had come home drunk, lost his keys, and had broken into his own apartment. The police were called because someone thought it was a break-in. They thought it was my unit at first, which is why they were at my windows, trying to see inside, trying to figure out what was going on without breaking down a door or causing damage. When they realized it wasn't my place, they left to deal with the real situation. That night changed how I felt about that apartment. I kept the blinds closed on every window after that. I kept the knife closer, and I started looking for a new place to live, somewhere with a bit more security, somewhere I could feel safe again. It took a while for my heart to stop racing every time I heard footsteps outside or a knock at the door. But I never forgot how small I felt that night, how close fear can get when you're alone in the dark and someone's just outside your window. We didn't plan much when we decided to go on that trip. It was one of those spontaneous ideas that sounded fun and adventurous in the moment. My boyfriend and I had both been working too much and feeling stuck in the usual routine. One evening, while we were sitting on the couch with our dogs curled up at our feet, we just looked at each other and decided it was time to get out of the city. We didn't have a destination in mind, just a general idea. We wanted to head north, up to the redwoods in Northern California. I had been there as a kid a few times and remembered how massive the trees were, how small they made everything else feel. That feeling of being surrounded by something so ancient and quiet. We figured it would be the perfect escape. We packed light, just enough clothes for a few days, some camping gear, and a cooler with snacks and water. The dogs were excited, jumping into the car before we even had the chance to load it properly. It was already getting dark when we finally hit the road, but we didn't mind. We played music, took turns driving, and just let the highway take us wherever it wanted. The further we drove, the more the city lights faded behind us, and the quieter everything became. There was something peaceful about it at first, just the sound of the tires on the road and the soft breathing of the dogs as they dozed off in the back seat. The first night we camped out near a small river we found just off a side road. It wasn't an official campsite, just a clearing where we could park the car and set up a small fire. We cooked some simple food, let the dogs run around, and fell asleep listening to the water and the wind through the trees. The second day we kept driving north, stopping here and there to take pictures or stretch our legs. By the time the sun started to set that evening, we were pretty deep into the redwoods, with no real idea where we were. It didn't matter much to us at the time. That was part of the fun, not having a plan, just going. That's when we ended up meeting this friend of a friend. We stopped at a small town to grab a bite to eat, and maybe find somewhere to camp or crash for the night. The place wasn't much, just a couple of streets, a few stores, and a bar that looked like it had been there forever. We went in, ordered a couple of beers, and ended up chatting with this woman at the bar. She was friendly, said she knew one of our friends from back home. We talked for a while, and when she found out we didn't have a place to stay, she invited us to crash at her house. We were grateful. It meant we didn't have to spend money on a motel or try to find another spot in the dark. Her house was something else. A big old Victorian that looked like it had been standing there for over a century. It was the kind of place you see in movies, with those steep gables and ornate trim, big bay windows out front, and a wide porch that wrapped around the front. It had character. She told us most of the people who lived there were students, but since it was summer, most of them were gone. That night it was just her and one other roommate, both upstairs, and us downstairs. We had a few more beers, sat on the porch for a while, and let the dogs explore the yard. The place was surrounded by thick bushes and old trees, the kind that creak when the wind hits them just right. It was quiet out there, darker than we were used to, with no streetlights and just a thin sliver of moon. When we finally came inside, she showed us to a room right off the front door. It was more like a sitting room, really, with a fireplace that hadn't been used in ages and big bay windows looking out onto the yard. The futon was set up for us, and we threw our sleeping bags on top of it. The dogs curled up on the floor next to us. It didn't take long to fall asleep. The drive had worn us out, and the few beers didn't hurt either. The house was so quiet, and I remember thinking how nice it was to just be somewhere peaceful. But that peace didn't last. I don't know what time it was when the doorbell first rang, but it felt like I had just closed my eyes. The sound was so loud, that deep, old-fashioned chime that echoed through the house. It startled me awake, and I could feel my boyfriend jolt next to me. The dogs lifted their heads, ears perked, but they didn't bark. We heard footsteps above us, then down the stairs, and then the creak of the front door opening. We stayed where we were, half expecting to hear voices, but there was nothing. After a minute or two, the door shut, and we heard the steps go back upstairs. I lay there for a while, listening to the wind outside, trying to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe it was normal here for people to show up late. Maybe someone got the wrong house. I could see the branches of the trees moving in the breeze through the window, casting shadows that shifted across the room. We must have fallen back asleep because the next thing I knew, the doorbell rang again. That same loud chime, and this time it made my heart race. The dogs were sitting up now, alert. We heard the roommate come down again, open the door, and close it. But this time, instead of going back upstairs right away, she stepped into the room we were in. I could see her standing there, looking uneasy, though it was hard to tell in the dim light. She didn't stay long, just went back upstairs. The house felt different now, like the quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy, like we were waiting for something to happen. We tried to sleep again. I kept telling myself the doorbell must be broken, maybe shorting out or something, but I couldn't get comfortable. Every little sound outside made me tense up. The creak of the trees, the rustle of the bushes, even the soft patter of the dogs shifting on the floor. At some point, I must have dozed off again because I woke up to this deep, low growl. It took me a second to realize it was coming from one of the dogs. It wasn't a sound I was used to hearing from him. He's the kind of dog who loves everyone, who would wag his tail at a stranger on the street. But now he was staring at the window, his body tense, that growl rumbling out of him like I'd never heard before. My boyfriend whispered for him to be quiet, probably thinking, like I did, that it was just the unfamiliar setting making him nervous. The dog didn't stop right away, but eventually settled down, though he kept watching the window like he was waiting for something. I tried to tell myself it was fine. We were tired in a strange place, and it was just nerves. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I kept glancing at the window, half expecting to see something there. The night felt endless, every minute dragging by. Then it happened. I woke up to my boyfriend jumping out of bed, and before I could even ask what was wrong, he was at the window, slamming his hand against the glass and yelling. I sat up, heart pounding, and that's when I saw it. A man's face, right there in the window, just feet from where we slept. His expression was blank, cold, like he was just watching. He didn't flinch when my boyfriend hit the glass, didn't move until my boyfriend grabbed the axe we'd left nearby from camping and threw open the door. I watched as he ran out onto the porch and down the steps, the dogs right on his heels. The man outside took off down the street, and my boyfriend chased after him for a while before coming back, out of breath and still clutching the axe. The guy was gone, disappeared into the night. But the damage was done. The sense of safety we'd felt was shattered. The noise woke the others in the house. The roommates came down, looking confused and scared. We stayed up the rest of the night, sitting in that front room, watching the windows, listening for any sign that the man had come back. Every sound outside made us jump. Every shadow felt like it might be him. But he didn't come back. Morning felt like it would never come, but eventually the first light started to creep in, and with it, some sense of relief. We left early that day, packed up our things, and hit the road before the sun was fully up. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see that man again, standing at the edge of the yard or hiding behind the bushes. But there was nothing, just the quiet streets of that small town, empty and still in the early morning. I thought about it the whole drive back. The way he had stood there, watching us. The way he had rung the doorbell, maybe trying to see who would answer. If my boyfriend and I hadn't been there, if it had just been the two girls home that night, I don't like to think about what might have happened. It wasn't about robbing the house. There was no reason for him to ring the bell so many times if that was all he wanted. He was looking for something else, or someone. That thought still makes my skin crawl. We didn't talk much on the way home. There wasn't much to say. We were both tired, drained from the night, and just wanted to get back to somewhere familiar. When we finally got back to the city, it felt strange at first, the noise and the people and the lights. But it was a relief too. I don't think I've ever been so glad to hear the sounds of traffic and neighbors going about their day. The dogs slept the whole way home, worn out from the night. When we got back to our apartment, they went right to their spots, as if nothing had happened. But for a long time after that trip, every time I heard a noise outside at night, I'd feel that same chill run through me. I'd check the locks twice before bed, pull the curtains tight. That night in the Victorian house stuck with me. Not because of ghosts or anything like that. Just because of the simple, quiet terror of knowing someone was out there, watching, waiting, and that we'd only just stopped him in time. When I was 7 years old, my life changed in ways I never really understood until much later. My parents had to move to another city for work. They said it would only be for a few months, just until my older brother finished middle school, so we could all move together. I didn't really care about the details. All I knew was that I was going to live with my grandmother, and at 7, that felt like the best news ever. My grandma's house was small, just 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen with cracked linoleum floors, and a living room that smelled like old furniture and coffee. It had this warmth to it, though, the kind of warmth that only comes from being lived in for decades. There was an old rug in the living room, worn thin in spots where people's feet had passed again and again over the years. The wallpaper was faded, peeling at the corners, yellowed from time and cigarette smoke. But it was homey. It felt safe at first. What made it even better for me was that my grandma spoiled me. Every day she handed me sweets. Cookies, hard candies, sweet bread she made herself. She didn't care if I finished my vegetables. She didn't care if I went to bed late. She let me sit on her lap and play with her soft, wrinkled hands, and she would tell me stories about when my dad was a boy. My grandma was a small woman, always wearing a dress, her gray hair tied up in a bun, and she had this soft voice that made everything sound gentler than it was. But the house was crowded. My grandma lived there with 4 of my aunts and my uncle. There were too many people in too small of a space. We made it work, though. At night, 3 of my aunts and I would sleep in one of the bedrooms, crammed together on mattresses pushed up against each other. My uncle and grandma slept in the living room, on an old sofa and a mattress they would drag out from a corner. The other bedroom was taken up by my other aunt. She was different from the rest. She was schizophrenic. As a kid, I didn't know what schizophrenia really meant. I just knew that my aunt was strange. She always stayed in her room, and when she did come out, she mumbled to herself, her eyes wide and darting around like she was looking for something no one else could see. Her room was off limits to everyone, but sometimes I'd peek in when she left the door open. The walls were covered in crayon drawings. Not drawings on paper, on the actual walls. Swirls of red, blue, green, black. Shapes that didn't make sense. Faces that were half-formed. Words that weren't spelled right. Sometimes just lines, over and over again, like she couldn't stop. At night, I could hear her talking in there. Long conversations, but with no one. I could hear the rise and fall of her voice, like she was arguing or pleading. Sometimes she laughed, this high, strange laugh that would send a chill up my back, even though I didn't really understand why. My grandma tried to make her take pills, but most of the time she didn't. Sometimes she'd spit them out. Sometimes she'd just refuse, and my grandma was too tired to fight with her. At first, it was just weird. It was like living in a house that had its own rules, where things that would scare other kids were just part of the background noise. I got used to it in a way that only kids can. I'd fall asleep to the sound of my aunt muttering to herself, and wake up to the smell of my grandma cooking breakfast. But then things started to feel different. My aunt started getting into these strange habits. One of them was cutting hair. It started small. My grandma would notice pieces of her own hair missing in the morning. She'd brush it off, thinking she was just shedding. Then my uncle found a lock of his hair on his pillow, cleanly snipped off. My aunts would find bits of hair on the floor, strands that didn't match their own. My grandma would scold my aunt, but she just stared past her like she wasn't even there. I didn't think much of it at first. I was too busy enjoying all the things I wasn't allowed to do at home. I played outside until dark. I ate candy before dinner. I watched TV as late as I wanted. I was having fun, but the nights started to feel heavier. I started waking up for no reason. I'd wake up sweating, even when it wasn't hot. The air felt thick, like the house was holding its breath. One night, I woke up to the creak of the bedroom door opening. That wasn't unusual. Someone was always up, going to the bathroom, getting a glass of water. But this time, it felt different. I didn't move. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling in the dark, trying to listen. I could hear the soft shuffle of bare feet on the floor. And then I felt it. The mattress shifted. Someone was right next to me. I turned my head slowly, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. There, in the pale light coming through the window, was my aunt. She was crouched over me, one hand gripping a pair of scissors. The scissors were old, the kind you use to cut fabric, with black handles and blades that caught the light. She was holding them near my neck, so close I could feel the cold metal against my skin. For a moment, I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. I just stared at her, and she stared at me, but it was like she wasn't really seeing me. Her eyes were wide, her face blank, but her hand was steady. I didn't know what she was going to do. I didn't know if she wanted to cut my hair, or hurt me, or something else. The room felt so still, like even the air was waiting to see what would happen next. Then, as quickly as she'd come in, she straightened up, turned, and walked out. The door clicked shut behind her. I lay there for a long time, too scared to move, too scared to call out. When morning came, I told my grandma, and the house went into a quiet kind of panic. My parents were called right away. I remember the rush of packing my things, the way my grandma kept wringing her hands, the way my uncle kept looking at my aunt's door like it might open again at any second. My parents came that same day. They didn't even stay for coffee. They loaded me into the car, and we drove away. I didn't even get to say goodbye to my grandma the way I wanted to. The ride was quiet. My mom kept looking back at me, her face pale, her lips pressed together like she wanted to say something but couldn't. We moved to a new house after that. It was old, much older than my grandma's house. The paint was peeling on the outside, the windows were drafty, and the floors creaked with every step. But it was ours. It was supposed to be a fresh start. My parents said it was temporary until they found something better. The problem was, this house came with its own kind of nightmares. The first time it happened, I was brushing my teeth before bed. I looked down into the sink and saw something wriggling near the drain. At first, I thought it was just a piece of hair or some string. But then it moved again. A long, pale earthworm, twisting and turning in the bottom of the sink. I called for my dad, and he came in, sighing like he was already tired of this place, and scooped it out with some tissue, flushing it down the toilet. But it kept happening. Every night, when I'd go to brush my teeth or wash my hands, I'd see them, long, slimy earthworms crawling up out of the drains like they were trying to escape something below. The worst was in the bathroom. I hated going in there after dark. Sometimes I'd lift the toilet lid and see one wriggling in the water. Sometimes they'd be on the floor, leaving faint trails behind them. The shower was the same. I'd pull back the curtain and see them crawling along the tiles, pale in the moonlight that came through the cracked window. As a kid, I didn't know much about plumbing or old houses. I just thought the house was alive in some way, spitting up these worms at night to scare me. I started holding it until morning, refusing to use the bathroom after dark unless I absolutely had to. My dad tried to seal the drains, tried to pour stuff down them to kill whatever was down there, but nothing worked. The worms kept coming, night after night. I'd lie in bed, listening to the house creak and groan as it settled. Every little noise made my heart race. I kept thinking about my aunt, about the cold touch of the scissors at my neck, about the way she had looked right through me like I wasn't even there. I'd pull the covers over my head and try to block out the world, try to pretend I was back at my old house, before everything got so strange. But the thing is, time passed, and slowly things got better. The worms didn't stop coming, not entirely, but I learned to live with them. My parents found another place eventually, a newer house, one where the floors didn't creak so much, where the drains stayed clear, where I could finally sleep through the night without waking up in a cold sweat. I never went back to live with my grandma. I visited, sure, but I never stayed the night. My aunt eventually moved into a care home where they made sure she took her medication. My parents never talked about what happened at my grandma's house. It was like we all silently agreed to leave it in the past. But I remember everything. The feel of that old mattress under me. The way the moonlight looked on my aunt's face. The cold touch of those scissors. The sound of worms wriggling up from the dark. And I remember how somehow we got through it. How, even when it felt like the world had turned into a nightmare, we kept going. And in the end, we found our way back to something like normal. I used to work at this big old church on the edge of town. It wasn't anything fancy or historic, just one of those places that had been around long enough that everyone seemed to have been inside at some point. Whether for a wedding, a funeral, or one of those pancake breakfasts they held twice a year. My job there was head sound engineer. I handled the microphones, speakers, mixing board, everything related to audio during Sunday services and events. Most of my work happened during the day, but there were always those little side tasks that could be done anytime. One of those was duplicating CDs of the sermons. People would request copies to listen to in their cars or at home, and sometimes they'd want a full series spanning weeks or even months. I'd have to find time outside of the main services to handle that, because it took a while. Since I was more of a night person, I often chose to do this work at night when the building was empty. It was quiet, peaceful, and I could work without interruption. I had a key to the church, so it was never a problem. Most nights, I didn't even bother turning on the lights. I knew the place like the back of my hand, and the faint light from the street lamps outside gave me just enough visibility to navigate. I never felt uneasy. This was a building I'd spent hundreds of hours in, alone at night. It was like a second home. The layout of the church was pretty straightforward. You'd enter through the main doors into a foyer. From there, you could go through another set of doors into the sanctuary where services were held. The sanctuary had a large balcony along the back wall, open to the main room below. That's where the sound booth was, and that's where I'd go to duplicate the CDs. There was only one way up to the balcony, a staircase off the foyer, and the door to the balcony could be locked from the inside. The sound booth itself overlooked the whole sanctuary. From up there, you could see the stage, the pews, everything. The acoustics were excellent. You could hear a person whisper on stage from the back of the room. That night, I arrived at the church around 1 or 2 in the morning. I parked my car, unlocked the main doors, and stepped inside. The air was cool and still, like it always was at night. I walked through the foyer and up the stairs to the balcony. At the top, I flipped on a single light in the sound booth, a small bulb about 15 feet above my head. That was all I needed. The rest of the sanctuary below stayed dark except for the soft glow from the streetlights outside. I got to work, loading up the duplicator with blank CDs and setting up the sermon recordings. An hour passed without anything out of the ordinary. The room was silent except for the hum of the duplicator and the occasional creak of the old building settling. Then, out of nowhere, I heard it. A faint but distinct sound that echoed through the sanctuary. It was the clink of ceramic, like 2 coffee mugs gently knocking together. The sound came from about 20 feet below me, off to the left side of the pews. I froze, listening. Clink, clink. It happened again, soft but clear. I knew that sound well. We served coffee in ceramic mugs during Sunday mornings at the little coffee bar the church ran. People would grab a mug, sit down in the pews, and sometimes leave them behind. Volunteers usually collected them after services, but they'd miss a few now and then. I'd heard that clinking sound 1,000 times as mugs were gathered up, but there was no reason I should be hearing it now, in the middle of the night, in a dark and empty church. I stared into the darkness, trying to see if I could spot anything. But there was nothing, just rows of empty pews fading into shadows. I stood there for a few minutes, straining my ears. The sound had stopped. My curiosity got the better of me. I had to check it out. I left the sound booth, walked down the stairs, and entered the foyer. I flipped on all the sanctuary lights. The room flooded with light, and immediately I felt more at ease. I walked down the rows of pews toward where I thought the sound had come from. I looked on top of the pews and around them, but didn't see anything. Knowing that mugs often ended up on the floor, I got down on my hands and knees at the front of the sanctuary. From there I could see under every pew at once. Sure enough, there were a few mugs under various pews, just like I expected, but none of them were close enough to touch each other. The nearest 2 were at least 3 or 4 feet apart. There was no way they could have clinked together. I stood up, puzzled but not too concerned. Maybe I'd imagined it, or maybe it was just the building creaking in a way that happened to sound like mugs. I turned off the lights and went back up to the balcony. I settled back into my work, letting the hum of the duplicator soothe me. Maybe 15 minutes later, I heard it again. Clink, clink. Same spot. My stomach dropped. I knew I hadn't imagined it this time. The sound was too clear, too familiar. I went back down, flipped the lights on, and checked again. Same result. The mugs were still scattered, still too far apart to touch. I left one light on in the sanctuary this time, hoping it would make me feel a little less uneasy. I locked the balcony door behind me, just in case, and went back to work. About half an hour passed without incident. I started to convince myself that it was over, that whatever caused the sound was done. But then I heard it again. Clink, then clink, clink. It went on like that, soft and spaced out, but unmistakable. I scanned the room from the balcony, heart racing. There was nothing to see. No movement. No explanation. I stayed where I was, determined to finish my work as quickly as possible. The sound continued off and on. Sometimes just a single clink, other times 2 or 3 in quick succession. I kept glancing down, hoping for some sign of what was causing it, but the sanctuary stayed empty and still. After a while, the clinking stopped for good. I started to relax again, thinking maybe that was the end of it. Then, without warning, the entire room seemed to come alive. The walls vibrated, the floor beneath my feet trembled, and a low rumble filled the air. It was deep, like bass turned up so high it shakes everything. I looked at the mixing board. The LED levels were maxed out, the red lights blazing, as if the system was being overwhelmed by some huge input. But there were no mics plugged in, no amps on, nothing connected that could be causing it. The speakers weren't even on. The sound wasn't coming from the system. The building itself was shaking. It lasted maybe 30 seconds, maybe less. It felt like forever. When it stopped, the silence that followed was deafening. I stood there frozen, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My mind raced through possibilities. An earthquake? But we didn't get earthquakes here. Some kind of machinery nearby. But nothing was running at that hour, and I would have heard it before. I couldn't come up with anything that fit. Shaken, I gathered my things and left the church as fast as I could. I locked up behind me, got in my car, and drove home. The next day, I went back during daylight hours. Everything was normal. The mugs were still where I'd seen them the night before. The sanctuary was quiet. No sign that anything had happened. I talked myself out of mentioning it to anyone. What could I say? That the building shook and the sound system lit up with nothing plugged in? That I heard coffee mugs clinking in the middle of the night when no one was there? It all sounded crazy. Over the years, I tried to think of logical explanations. Maybe it was the building settling in some strange way. Maybe the heating system made the mugs shift and clink somehow. Maybe some outside vibration caused it all. But nothing really fit. The church stood solid as ever, and no one else ever mentioned anything like that happening again. I never stayed there late at night after that. Whatever the explanation was, I decided it wasn't worth sticking around to figure it out. I finished my work during the day, with the sanctuary filled with light and people nearby. And eventually, I left that job and moved on. But I still think about that night. The clinking of the mugs, the rumble that shook the whole room, the strange overload on the soundboard. I don't have an answer, and maybe I never will. All I know is that for one night, in a place I knew better than anywhere, something happened that I can't explain. And I'm not sure I want to. We had planned the camping trip a few weeks before, mostly on a whim. My best friend Carly, her boyfriend James, and I had been looking for a quick weekend escape, somewhere quiet, away from the constant noise of the city and our jobs. Carly suggested Sumter National Forest because she'd been once before when she was younger. Said it was peaceful, beautiful, and not too crowded. That last part was what really convinced us. We were tired of crowds. We wanted a night in the woods with no one around. We didn't expect the rain, though. The forecast showed a chance of light rain in the early evening, but we figured it wouldn't be anything serious. It was warm for late fall, that kind of heavy, wet warmth that hangs in the air before a thunderstorm. When we got to the forest, everything looked soaked already. The leaves were slick, the dirt paths squished under our boots, and everything smelled like damp bark and moss. We had driven Carly's SUV, one of those big ones with a hatchback trunk and enough room for all of us to sleep if we had to. The plan was to camp in a small clearing Carly remembered from years back. There wasn't a real campsite there, but we didn't need much. Just some space to start a fire, set up a tent, and sit around for the night. We found the clearing after a bit of a drive down a muddy side road. It was secluded. No cars in sight, no people, not even the distant sound of another group somewhere nearby. Just trees and fog. It was starting to drizzle again when we parked, so we decided to hold off on setting up the tent. We ended up just sitting inside the SUV with the windows cracked, eating chips, drinking sodas, and talking while the rain tapped lightly on the roof. By 9 o'clock, the rain picked up. We still hadn't gotten out of the car. Eventually, we made peace with the fact that we weren't going to be pitching a tent in the mud that night. So we folded down the back seats and laid out sleeping bags and blankets. Carly crawled into one side, James took the middle, and I was on the other. It was a tight fit, but manageable. The windows fogged up fast from our breath and the warmth inside. The air felt thick, like the storm was waiting to let loose at any moment. To kill time, I pulled out a copy of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark that I'd brought as a joke. We passed it around for a while, taking turns reading by the light of our phone flashlights. James made dramatic voices, Carly laughed, and I did my best to keep the tone serious, even though I was grinning the whole time. By the time we stopped reading, it was just past midnight. The rain was steady now. No thunder or lightning, just a constant drumming on the roof that made it hard to hear anything else. We were all tired, so we killed the lights and tried to settle in for the night. That's when things started to feel off. It's hard to explain exactly when it started. It wasn't like there was a sudden noise or anything like that. It was more like a feeling that crept in gradually, like I'd forgotten something important or like I was being watched. I stared at the ceiling of the SUV in the dark, listening to the rain, but it didn't sound like just rain anymore. There were small, irregular thumps and taps. At first, I told myself it was acorns falling from trees or branches shifting in the wind, but there wasn't much wind, and the pattern didn't feel random. It felt like footsteps. Slow, soft, careful footsteps on wet ground. I held my breath for a moment and listened. There was the sound again. Closer now. Then silence. I whispered Carly's name. She didn't respond. James was breathing evenly, maybe asleep. I pushed myself up a little and tried to look through the fogged-up side window. I wiped a circle with my sleeve and peered out, but it was almost pitch black outside. The trees were barely visible, just dark shapes in the fog and rain. I laid back down, heart starting to pound. I told myself it was nothing. Just my imagination, getting the best of me after reading creepy stories and being out in the middle of nowhere. But then there was a sharp crack, like a stick breaking, off to the right of the car. This time, Carly sat up. I could see her outline shifting in the dark. "Did you hear that?" she asked, barely above a whisper. James stirred. "What?" "Something's out there." He sat up too, groaning a little. We all stared out the front windshield now, but it was fogged and smeared with rain. James reached for the keys and turned them just enough to power the lights. The headlights flicked on, bright against the dark woods, shining into the space directly in front of the SUV. The beam of light cut through the mist, illuminating the trees in front of us, but something moved on the right, just at the edge of the beam. A shape, just for a second. Tall, human-sized. Then it was gone, ducking behind a tree or stepping out of the light. I think we all froze. No one said anything. James reached for the flashlight from the front console. He was already unlocking the doors before Carly or I could stop him. "Don't go out there," I said, but it was too late. He opened the door and stepped out into the rain. He clicked on the flashlight and pointed it toward where the shape had been. The beam cut through the wet darkness in a narrow cone. He took a few slow steps toward the trees. Carly kept whispering for him to come back, her voice sharp with fear. He didn't listen. He moved deeper into the woods, maybe 20 yards or so. We could still see the glow of his flashlight moving between the tree trunks, bobbing as he walked. Then it stopped. For a second, the light was still, and then it swung wildly. Once, twice, before James came sprinting back toward the car. He was running full speed, splashing through the mud, arms pumping, breath loud and ragged. His face was pale, soaked, and he didn't even try to close the door behind him. He just jumped into the SUV and shouted, "Go! Go! Go!" I didn't need to ask questions. I climbed over into the front seat and jammed the keys into the ignition. The engine roared to life. I threw it in reverse and backed up, tires slipping a little in the mud, then shifted into drive and peeled out of the clearing. As we turned onto the narrow road, headlights sweeping the trees, I saw it. Something burst out of the woods behind us. It ran like a person, but not quite right, like it had a limp or a strange rhythm to its movement. It was tall, wrapped in what looked like filthy rags or torn clothing. I caught a glimpse of its face in the mirror. It was all wrong. Twisted, like parts of it didn't line up. I couldn't make out details, but what I saw was enough to make my stomach twist. I didn't stop driving. I kept going, hands gripping the wheel tight, knuckles white. I didn't speak, didn't look back. Carly was crying quietly. James was gasping for air, his back pressed against the door like he couldn't get far enough away from whatever he'd seen. We drove for a long time. The road twisted and turned, trees crowding close, and I kept expecting to see something in the headlights again. But we didn't. Eventually, we hit the main road. A little while later, we found a Piggly Wiggly grocery store with a big empty parking lot. The store was closed, but the lights in the lot were on. I pulled into a corner of the lot and killed the engine. We sat there for a while, not saying anything, just breathing, listening to the rain on the roof again. But this time, it was just rain. No footsteps. No broken sticks. Eventually, James told us what he saw. He said when he got far enough into the woods, he heard breathing. Heavy, raspy, labored breathing. He pointed the flashlight toward the sound and saw a man, or what looked like a man, standing between the trees. The man was hunched, wearing shredded, wet layers of clothing. His face was. James couldn't describe it well. He just said it was messed up, like someone had taken pieces from different people and stuck them together wrong. His eyes didn't look human. When the flashlight hit him, the man looked up and immediately started running toward James fast. No hesitation, no words, just a full sprint straight at him. James ran. He said he didn't look back until he was almost to the car. He didn't see the man again after that. Neither did we. We stayed in that parking lot the rest of the night. We didn't sleep. None of us wanted to be alone or in the dark. We kept the headlights off but left the dome light on, just enough to see each other. By morning, we drove back home. We didn't go to the police. What would we say? That a strange man ran at us in the woods? That we were scared? We weren't hurt, and nothing happened to the car. It felt like we'd get laughed out of the station, so we said nothing. We never went camping again after that. At least, not anywhere without other people nearby. And I've never been able to hear rain on the roof the same way again. It's kind of hard to explain to people who don't live out where I do, but my house is about as remote as you can get without actually living out in the woods. It's not some little cabin or anything like that, just a regular house, but the location makes all the difference. I live outside of town, maybe a good 10-minute walk from where the last streetlight stands. The road that connects the town to my place runs straight through this big open stretch of nothing. No houses, no shops, no lights, just this narrow strip of cracked asphalt, weeds pushing up from the sides, and the empty fields that spread out on either side. In the daytime, it's fine, peaceful even, but at night, especially on moonless nights, it turns into this endless wall of black. The kind of black where if you turn off your phone, you can't even see your hand in front of your face. I've gotten used to it for the most part. I don't have a car, and cabs don't come out that far, so walking is my only option. And honestly, sometimes it's nice. There are nights when I stop and look up, and it's like the sky is exploding with stars. Way more than you can see in town. You can pick out the Milky Way like it's painted up there. It's beautiful, quiet in a way that's hard to describe. But there are other nights when that same quiet starts to feel too quiet. When the dark feels too thick, and your own footsteps sound too loud, and you start to wonder if maybe you're not as alone as you think. This story happened on one of those nights. I remember it was a Friday night, or maybe early Saturday morning by the time I started walking home. I'd stayed late at a buddy's place in town. We'd had a couple beers, nothing crazy, and just hung out, shot the shit. I wasn't drunk or anything, just tired, ready to get home and crash. My headphones had broken earlier that week. One side had stopped working, and then the wire got all messed up, so I didn't have music to keep me company on the walk back. That left me with just my thoughts and the sound of my boots on the pavement. It was probably around 2:30, maybe closer to 3. The streets in town were dead. Not a car in sight, not a person, not even a stray cat. Just me walking along under those old orange streetlights that buzz when you get close. I was passing through the last bit of town where the houses get farther apart and older. The kind of houses that look like they've been around forever. Paint peeling, fences leaning, porches with furniture that probably should have been thrown out years ago. I wasn't thinking much about anything, just counting down the houses till I hit the dark stretch and had to pull out my phone for light. Then, for no real reason, I happened to glance up at one of the houses on my right. It was this 2-story place that I'd walked by 100 times before without giving it much thought. But that night, I looked up at the second-floor window, and that's when I saw her. She was standing right up against the glass. A woman, pressed so close that I could make out her face, even though the room behind her was completely dark. No curtains, no light, nothing. Just her face there, pale in the blackness, and her body stiff like a statue. Her arms hung straight down at her sides, and she didn't move at all, not even a twitch. Her expression was blank, almost like she wasn't really seeing me. But she had to be, right? She was staring straight down at me, right where I was walking on the sidewalk. I froze for a second. My heart did that weird little stutter, like when you miss a step on the stairs. Then I kind of jumped back without meaning to and let out this loud, stupid hoo-hoo, like some cartoon character. I turned my head fast, eyes wide, and kept walking, picking up my pace toward the edge of town. My heart was pounding, my breath quick and shallow, and I felt my face flush with this weird mix of fear and embarrassment. After a few seconds, I let out this nervous laugh. I felt like an idiot. I mean, really, some woman standing at her window in her own house, and I freak out like I'd seen a ghost or something. I shook my head and tried to calm myself down. The sound of my boots on the pavement seemed louder now, echoing off the empty street. I told myself to stop being ridiculous. Maybe she couldn't sleep and was just looking out at the night. Maybe she heard me coming and was curious. People do weird things when they can't sleep. I've stared out windows at nothing before too. It's not that strange. But even as I tried to reason it out, that image of her wouldn't leave my head. The way she was standing so close to the glass. The way she didn't move at all, not even a little shift of weight or a tilt of the head. No blink, no change of expression, just that blank face watching me. It started to creep me out more the longer I thought about it. And that's when the other thought hit me, the one that really made my skin crawl. That house, it looked empty. It had looked empty for as long as I could remember. No lights on, no cars in the driveway, no signs of anyone living there. And even if someone did live there, who just stands in a pitch-black room like that, pressed against the window, at 3 in the morning, I felt this cold wave of dread wash over me. My hands were shaking a little as I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The edge of town was just ahead now, and beyond it, the road that led home. That long, dark road I'd walked so many times before. But this time, I didn't feel the usual peace when I stepped into the darkness. I felt exposed, like maybe she was still watching me, even though I couldn't see her anymore. Like maybe someone else was watching too. I didn't stop to admire the stars that night. I didn't look up once. I kept my eyes on the narrow beam of light from my phone, watching the cracked asphalt, the weeds at the edges of the road, the occasional bit of broken glass glinting in the light. My heart was still pounding in my chest, and every little sound, the crunch of gravel under my boots, the rustle of grass in the breeze, felt way too loud. About a minute into the dark stretch, I realized I was speeding up. Not quite running, but close. My legs were stiff, and my breath came fast. My ears strained for any sound behind me, any footstep that wasn't mine. I kept telling myself I was being stupid. That woman was probably just some insomniac who'd moved in recently. Or maybe I was wrong about the house being empty. Maybe I just hadn't noticed someone living there. But no matter how much I tried to reason it out, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The road felt longer than usual that night. Every step felt like it echoed into the blackness. The beam of my phone light seemed too small, too weak, like it barely made a dent in the darkness. The stars above felt distant and cold, offering no comfort. I kept moving faster and faster until I finally broke into a full run. I didn't stop running until I reached my driveway, my chest heaving, sweat cold on my skin despite the chill of the night air. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if anything, or anyone, was behind me. I fumbled with my keys, dropped them once, cursed under my breath, and finally got the door open. I slammed it shut behind me, locked it, and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. Inside my house, it was dark and quiet. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I just stood there listening. My own heartbeat was so loud in my ears that it drowned out everything else. After a while, when I didn't hear anything, no footsteps, no knock at the door, no sound at all except the night wind, I finally let myself relax. I slid down to the floor, my back against the door, and stayed there for a while, just breathing. Later, when I finally got up the nerve to peek out through a gap in the curtain, there was nothing out there. Just the empty road, the stars above, and the night stretching out in all directions. The house I'd passed was too far away to see from my window, hidden behind trees and the curve of the road. And maybe that was for the best. I didn't want to see that window again, didn't want to know if she was still there, standing in the dark, watching. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every time the wind rattled the windows, my heart skipped a beat. But nothing happened. The night passed, morning came, and the world looked normal again in the daylight. Still, even now, whenever I walk that road at night, I can't help but glance at that house. I never see anything in the window, but the memory of that woman, standing there in the dark, staring down at me, stays with me, and I don't think I'll ever forget it. It was a warm day, one of those early spring afternoons where the air still had a bit of a chill, but the sun felt good on your skin. I remember the way the breeze smelled, like grass and pavement, and faintly of flowers starting to bloom. My best friend and I had just left school. We were in middle school then, around 12 or 13 years old, feeling like we were growing up, but still just kids in so many ways. We did what we always did, walked together towards her house after school, bags slung over our shoulders, talking about whatever had happened during the day. I don't even remember what we were chatting about at first. Probably something dumb like a teacher we thought was unfair, or a kid who did something funny in class. Her house wasn't far from the school, maybe a mile or so, an easy walk. We knew the route so well we didn't even think about it. Past the old church with the cracked steps, past the corner store that sold candy and sodas, past a few blocks of quiet houses with small yards and cars parked along the curb. We always felt safe. It was just part of our daily routine. Sometimes we'd stop at the store if we had a little change between us, but that day we didn't. We just wanted to get to her house, probably to grab a snack, and hang out before my mom would come pick me up later. We were about 2 blocks from her place, and I remember the street we were on, lined with maple trees just starting to sprout tiny green leaves. The sidewalks were cracked here and there, little weeds pushing up through them. The sun was out, making everything look bright and harmless. That's when the car came creeping up beside us. It was an older car, I think maybe a brown or tan color. The kind of car that looked like it hadn't been washed in a while. Not falling apart, but not new either. The windows were rolled down, and I noticed it because the sound of the tires rolling slowly along the curb caught my ear. It was that slow, deliberate sound, like he was matching our pace on purpose. At first I didn't think much of it. Sometimes cars slowed down if someone was looking for an address or about to park. But he kept rolling alongside us, and after a few seconds, I glanced over and saw the driver looking at us. He was older, but not elderly. Maybe in his 40s or 50s, hard to tell exactly. He had thinning hair, kind of greasy looking, and he wore glasses that glinted in the sunlight. His face didn't look friendly, but not mean either, just blank, like he was focused on something. It didn't hit me right away how weird it was. I was too young, too trusting. My friend didn't seem to notice at first either. We kept walking, but then he called out to us. He offered us a ride, just like that. Said it was no trouble. He'd be happy to take us where we were going. His voice was smooth, too smooth, like he was trying hard to sound casual and kind. I remember my stomach feeling weird in that moment, like a knot started to form, but I didn't really understand why. We kind of laughed nervously. It felt awkward, like why would some stranger offer 2 kids a ride when we were clearly just walking along fine on our own? We said no, tried to brush it off, kept walking. But he didn't stop. He kept his car crawling along beside us, tires making that slow crunching sound on bits of gravel at the edge of the road. He kept talking, saying things like it was his pleasure, no bother at all, the least he could do. The more he talked, the more uncomfortable I felt. His voice didn't match his words, if that makes sense. The words were polite, but the way he said them made my skin crawl. Like he wasn't really offering to help. He was trying to get something. I glanced at my friend and saw the look on her face change. That's when it really hit me. She looked nervous, eyes a little wide, mouth set in a tight line. She developed earlier than the rest of us. I remember how that always drew unwanted attention from boys and even grown men. At that age, I didn't fully get it, but I knew it made her uncomfortable. And now this guy seemed to focus more on her. His eyes kept flicking to her, lingering. He started to say things that weren't directed at both of us anymore. Things like, "You look tired. I can help you out. Come on. It's not safe to walk alone. Let me do you a favor." Always with that fake friendly tone. We didn't say much after that, just kept our heads down and kept walking. I felt my heart thumping harder, like I was finally realizing this wasn't just some awkward guy trying to be nice. This was something else. Something bad. My mind raced, but I didn't know what to do besides keep moving. We weren't far from her house now. I kept thinking, just a little further, just get to her place, just get somewhere safe. The car kept following, creeping along so slow it felt like it was barely moving. I could hear the engine humming low, the tires crunching softly. I kept looking straight ahead, but I could feel his gaze, could feel the tension building with every step. The street felt empty, no other people out, no cars passing by. Just us and him. I kept wishing someone would come out of a house, someone would see us, but no one did. The closer we got to her house, the faster we walked. Not running, not yet, but picking up the pace. I could feel sweat on my back, not from heat, but from fear. My friend's face was pale, jaw clenched tight. The man kept talking, kept trying to convince her. I couldn't even make out all his words anymore because my mind was so focused on just getting to that front door. And then, finally, we turned onto her street. I remember the way the car's tires scraped against the curb as he turned too, still following, still trying. We could see her house now, could see her front yard, the little porch, the door that led inside where we'd be safe. We didn't say anything to each other, just kept moving as fast as we could without outright running. I think we were afraid that if we ran, it would make him do something. Like maybe if we acted normal, he'd give up. But he didn't. We reached her yard, stepped up onto the curb, and that's when something changed. I don't know if he realized we were at our destination, or if he saw us speed up that last bit, or if he finally figured it wasn't going to work. But he suddenly sped up just a little, and then drove off down the street, tires making that low grumbling sound as he pulled away. No words, no wave, just gone. We stood there for a second, frozen, watching his car until it disappeared around the corner at the end of the block. I remember the feeling then, that mix of relief and sickness. My legs felt shaky, and my mouth was dry. My friend let out a breath, and I realized I'd been holding mine too. We didn't say anything for a second, just went inside her house, closed the door behind us, and locked it. The normal sounds of the house, the hum of the fridge, the creak of the floorboards, felt strange after what just happened. We sat there in her living room, bags dropped on the floor, not even turning on the TV like we usually did, just sitting trying to calm down. After a while, we talked about it, about how weird it was, how creepy he'd been, how wrong it felt. The weight of it hit us then, that this wasn't just some awkward guy being too nice. He had followed us. He had focused on her. He had tried again and again to convince her to get in that car. And we'd been lucky, so lucky, because if we hadn't been so close to her house, if we'd been on a longer walk, if we'd hesitated, if we'd made any different choice, who knows what would have happened. When my mom came to pick me up later, I didn't even tell her right away. I didn't know how to explain it, didn't want to make a big deal out of it. But I thought about it that night, and for many nights after. The way he looked at us, the sound of his car creeping along, the way my gut twisted up with fear even before I fully understood why. I thought about how close we came to something that could have gone so differently, and I felt grateful we made it home safe, grateful we kept walking, grateful we didn't let him trick us. That day stayed with me. It taught me to listen to that little voice inside, the one that says something's not right. It made me watch out more, pay more attention, not brush off those weird feelings. And I never forgot his face, or his car, or that slow, creeping sound of him following us as we tried so hard to get to safety. I don't know what became of him. I never saw him again, but I hope to God he never got the chance to hurt anyone else. I was just a kid when this happened, maybe 7 or 8 years old. It's been so many years since that day, but for some reason I remember it so clearly, like it was yesterday. When I think back on it now, it feels like a small moment, but it stuck with me. Maybe because of how strange it was, or maybe because it felt like something more, even though I can't explain it. Anyway, I'll start from the beginning, so it makes sense. My great-grandmother had passed away not long before this happened. We weren't close, not in the way that people usually mean when they say that. She lived with my grandparents, so I only saw her when we went over there for visits. But whenever I did see her, she'd always smile at me. It wasn't the kind of smile that made you feel like she expected something from you, or that she was forcing it to be polite. It was this small, soft smile, like she was happy just to see me, no matter what I was doing. And then, without fail, she'd give me a thumbs up. I don't know why she did that. I don't remember her doing it to anyone else, just me. Maybe she did, and I didn't notice. Or maybe that was just our little thing. But every time she did it, it made me grin and giggle. I don't even know why it made me laugh like that. It was just so simple, but it felt nice. Like I was special in that small moment. After she passed, I didn't think about her much at first. I was a kid, and kids are caught up in their own worlds. But then, on this one day after school, I don't know what it was, but she came into my mind. Maybe something at school reminded me of her. Maybe I saw someone give a thumbs up, or maybe I was just daydreaming. Either way, as I walked home, I kept picturing her. That soft smile, that thumb sticking up, her hand trembling a little from age, but the gesture always steady. The way her eyes would crinkle a little at the corners when she smiled at me. And for some reason, as I thought about her, I felt warm. Not sad, just warm. like remembering her made me feel safe in some small way. When I got home, I was still thinking about her. I remember walking up to the front door, kicking off my shoes in the porch like I always did, and stepping inside. The house smelled like it always did after school. A little bit like dust, a little bit like whatever my mom had cooked earlier in the day, and just that regular smell of home that you don't notice until you've been gone for a while. I dropped my backpack by the door without really thinking and headed straight for the basement stairs. I don't even know why I was in such a hurry to get down there. Maybe I wanted to grab some toy or just run around like kids do. But I remember feeling this burst of energy, like I needed to move. The basement in our house wasn't like those creepy, dark basements you see in movies. It was finished, with carpet on the floor and wood paneling on the walls. My dad had set up a little TV down there, and we kept some of our toys and board games in a closet near the bottom of the stairs. But the stairs themselves were a bit tricky. They were steep, and they ended at a metal gate that my parents had put up when I was younger, so I wouldn't wander down there alone. The ceiling above the bottom of the stairs was low, only about 7 feet or so. I remember my uncle always ducking his head when he went down there because he was tall, and he didn't want to bump it. Between the top of the gate and the ceiling was maybe 4 feet of space, just enough that a tall person had to be careful. I started down the stairs like I always did, taking them 2 at a time because I was in a rush, my thoughts still filled with my great-grandma and that little thumbs up. And then about halfway down, my foot slipped. Maybe I missed a step. Maybe my sock caught on the edge of one. I don't know. All I know is that 1 second I was running down the stairs, and the next I was falling. And it wasn't like I stumbled and caught myself. I went down hard. I remember my stomach lurching up into my throat, that feeling when you know you're about to hit something, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. I should have hit that gate. Or at the very least, I should have slammed into it and bounced off or gone through it somehow. The way I was falling, that gate was right in my path. And with the ceiling so low, you'd think I'd have smacked my head or gotten hurt in some way. But I didn't. I landed on the floor at the bottom of the stairs, on the carpet, soft as could be. It was like someone had caught me and set me down gently. I remember lying there for a second, stunned. Not because I was hurt, I wasn't hurt at all, but because it didn't make sense. I knew how I'd been falling. I knew how hard I should have hit. But I didn't. I landed like I'd just stepped off the last stair. And right then, as I was lying there catching my breath, I thought of my great-grandma. That image of her giving me the thumbs up popped into my head so clear, so vivid. It was like she was standing right there in the room. I could see the little shake in her hand, the soft crinkle at the corners of her eyes, the slight tilt of her head when she smiled at me. And for some reason, I smiled back. I didn't feel scared or confused. I just felt okay, like everything was fine. I got up after that, brushed myself off, and went about whatever it was I had been planning to do. I didn't tell anyone about the fall. Not because I was hiding it, but because it didn't feel important at the time. It was only later, when I thought back on it, that it seemed strange. I kept going over it in my head, trying to figure out how I hadn't gotten hurt, how I hadn't even hit the gate. But no matter how many times I played it back in my memory, it didn't add up. I should have crashed into that gate. I should have at least banged my knees or elbows on something. But I didn't. I've thought about that day a lot over the years. At first, I wondered if maybe I imagined the fall. Maybe I didn't fall at all and just thought I did. But I remember that feeling of my foot slipping, the way my stomach jumped, the rush of air as I tumbled forward. That wasn't something I made up. I know what I felt, and I know how I landed. Soft, gentle, like I'd been caught. Of course, as I got older, I tried to explain it to myself in ways that made sense. Maybe I hit the gate, and it broke my fall without me realizing it. Maybe I twisted just right and landed on my feet. Maybe I rolled and didn't remember doing it. Maybe the carpet cushioned me more than I thought. There are lots of maybes, but none of them quite fit. None of them explain why that memory of my great-grandma was so strong in that moment. Or why, when I think about it now, it feels like more than just a lucky fall. I don't believe in ghosts or anything like that. I never have. I'm not the kind of person who thinks the dead stick around to watch over us. But still, when I remember that day, I can't help but wonder. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe my mind filled in the blanks with the image of my great-grandma because I'd been thinking about her so much that day. Maybe that's all it was. A kid's imagination running wild, connecting dots that weren't really there. But even now, as an adult, I can still see her in my mind as clear as anything. That soft smile, that trembling thumbs up. And I can still feel the way I landed that day. Like someone made sure I was safe. Like, just for that one moment, everything lined up to keep me from harm. And whether it was luck or something else, I'll never forget it. After that day, I didn't fall down those stairs again. I was more careful, sure. But it was more than that. Every time I went down to the basement, I'd glance at the gate, at the ceiling, at the narrow space where I should have hit my head or smashed into the bars. And I'd think about how I didn't. I'd remember how I felt lying on the carpet, surprised but unhurt. And for a moment, I'd feel that same warmth I felt when I thought of my great-grandma. That quiet comfort, like a soft blanket around my shoulders. In the end, I don't have a big lesson from this story. Nothing dramatic happened. No ghosts appeared. No hidden messages were found. I fell. I should have gotten hurt. I didn't. And for whatever reason, in that instant, I thought of her. That's all. But it stayed with me all these years. That clear, vivid memory. That strange moment of safety in what should have been a painful fall. And maybe that's enough. Maybe some things don't need explaining. Maybe they just are. And we carry them with us, small and quiet, for the rest of our lives. It was about 23 years ago, back when I was just a teenager, and I was visiting Haiti. My family is from there, and that summer I was spending time with my cousins in the countryside, where life felt simple but could get eerie, especially at night. Haiti's countryside is no joke when it comes to darkness. There are no streetlights out there, no nearby houses casting a friendly glow, no cars passing by with headlights cutting through the blackness. When the sun sets, it sets for real. The land goes quiet except for the crickets and the occasional dog barking somewhere far off. And the dark, it's the kind that feels like it presses down on you, wrapping around you so tight you can't see your own hand in front of your face. We were a group of maybe 6 or 7 cousins that night, out on one of those steep hillsides that make up so much of Haiti. The land there is full of rocks, loose dirt, scraggly bushes, and little trails that twist up and down between the hills. The kind of place where if you fall, you don't just scrape your knee, you might break something. But we weren't thinking about that. We were just kids, excited, restless, full of energy. We were playing a wild game of hide-and-seek mixed with a bit of tag, running up and down that hill, ducking behind big boulders, hiding under thorny bushes, laughing and shouting like we had no care in the world. The air smelled of dirt and plants, and under our bare feet we could feel the cool, uneven ground. The night was hot and humid, the kind of heat that sticks to your skin and makes your shirt cling to your back. Even though we were sweating and breathing hard from running so much, we didn't want to stop. The countryside around us was so quiet except for our own noise that it felt like we were the only people alive in the world. And maybe that's why we didn't notice at first that someone else was nearby. When you're caught up in your own fun, you don't always sense when things are changing. It was during one of those moments where we had all stopped running. Some of us bent over catching our breath, others standing tall looking around to see where the others were hiding, that this old man seemed to appear out of nowhere. I swear 1 second he wasn't there, and the next he was just standing a few yards away from us, like he had walked straight out of the darkness itself. It was so dark that night, no moonlight to help us see, but somehow we could make out his shape. He was thin, with bony shoulders, wearing clothes that looked ragged and old. His voice came first though, low and scratchy. He said something like, "Hey boys, you know where I can get some horseshoes?" We all froze, trying to make sense of it. Horseshoes? Out here in the middle of the hills? It didn't make any sense. And his voice, it wasn't angry or anything, but there was something about it that felt wrong. Like it didn't belong there with us. We didn't say anything, just stared at him, our hearts starting to beat faster for a reason we couldn't explain yet. Then he spoke again, quieter this time, almost like he was talking to himself. "My feet hurt," he said. And that's when we saw it. I don't know how we didn't notice right away, but maybe it was the dark, or maybe our minds just refused to believe what we were seeing. His legs, they weren't normal legs. From the knees down they were all wrong. The shape wasn't human. They bent the wrong way, and below that they looked like they belonged to an animal. Like a horse. Long, thin, with those hard, shiny hooves where feet should have been. For a second, none of us moved. It felt like time stopped, like the air got thick and heavy, and we were all stuck in place. And then, as if to break the silence, he made a sound. It was this high, whiny, broken noise, like a horse trying to neigh, but something was wrong with it. The sound echoed off the hills, sharp and cold. That was all we needed. Every one of us turned and ran as fast as we could. We weren't thinking about the rocks underfoot or the steepness of the hill or where we were going. We just ran, stumbling and sliding, pushing each other out of the way, our hearts beating so loud it felt like it filled our ears. I remember tripping at one point, my hands scraping against the rocks, but I didn't stop. I just got up and kept going. None of us spoke. There was no plan, no looking back to see if the man was following. Just pure fear pushing us forward. We ran all the way back to the house, bursting through the door, out of breath, our clothes torn and dirty. We didn't talk about it right away. We just sat there, catching our breath, trying to calm down. Eventually, we did talk, but no one had any answers. We didn't know who that man was, or what we had really seen. All we knew was that we didn't want to go back out into those hills at night again. But that wasn't the end of the strange things I experienced in Haiti. Not too long after that, another event happened that shook me even deeper. One of my cousins got sick out of nowhere. One day he was fine, laughing and playing with us like always, and the next he was lying in bed, sweating and shaking. His eyes were dull, his skin pale. The family tried everything they could, herbal remedies, prayers, even the local doctor, but nothing worked. He passed away quickly, and it didn't feel real. 1 minute he was with us, and the next he was gone. In Haiti, it's the custom for the immediate family to stay at the home of the parents of the one who died, at least for that first night after the burial. It's a way of being together, of mourning together, of protecting each other in a way. So that night, after we buried him, we all gathered at my uncle's house. The house was small and made of concrete, like many homes there, with a tin roof that rattled in the wind. The air inside felt heavy with sadness. People sat together, some talking in low voices, others just staring at the floor or out the window. The smell of burning candles mixed with the smell of the earth and the faint scent of flowers people had brought. I couldn't sleep that night. None of us could really. I lay on a thin mattress on the floor, staring up at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the night, the wind outside, the occasional dog barking far off, the soft sobbing of my aunt in the next room. And then, all of a sudden, there was a banging on the front door. Hard, loud, desperate. It echoed through the house, making us all sit up, our hearts pounding. And then we heard it, a voice we knew too well. It was my cousin's voice calling out, "Mom, let me in. Help, help." My blood ran cold. I couldn't move. No one could. We just sat there, frozen, listening. The banging continued. The voice kept pleading. It sounded like him. Exactly like him. The same tone, the same way of speaking. But we knew it couldn't be him. We had just buried him. We had seen his body lowered into the ground with our own eyes. And still the voice begged to be let inside. Then through the night, we heard more noises, men's voices, rough and angry. The sounds of a struggle, heavy footsteps, and then the sound of someone being dragged away. We couldn't see anything through the small windows, but we could hear it all so clearly. The banging stopped. The voice stopped. And then just silence. A deep, awful silence that filled the house and made it hard to breathe. No one slept after that. We just sat together, too scared to speak much, waiting for the morning to come. When the sun finally rose, it felt like we had survived something. And in a way, we had. Because in Haiti, there are people who do dark things. People who poison others to make them appear dead, only to dig them up later and use them as slaves, zombies they call them. It's not a fairy tale. It's something that happens. We had all heard the stories, and that night we lived the fear that comes with them. And in that moment, there was nothing we could do. Because trying to stop them, trying to fight them, could mean bringing death to everyone in the house. The next day, we stayed close together, our eyes tired and red, our hearts heavy not just with grief, but with fear. We never saw or heard from that cousin again, and we never forgot that night. The countryside of Haiti is beautiful, but it holds secrets, and sometimes those secrets come out in the dark. And when they do, all you can do is pray for morning to come. I woke up that Saturday morning with the same excitement I always felt on those days. The first sliver of sunlight was barely pushing through the curtains, casting soft golden stripes across my room. I lay there for a minute, staring at them, feeling my heart beating fast, not from fear or worry, but from pure excitement. Saturdays were my favorite day, not because school was out or because I could sleep in, but because it was the day I got to spend with my dad. Those 2 hours in his Bronco too, just him and me, driving through the quiet morning roads while he made his deliveries, were the best part of my week. I loved the way the world felt so still and calm at that hour, like everything had slowed down just for us. I jumped out of bed, my bare feet cold against the wooden floor, and pulled on my jeans and t-shirt as fast as I could. My hands trembled a little with the rush of getting ready, and I kept looking out the window, checking to see if the Bronco was parked out front yet. I could almost taste the sweet, artificial strawberry flavor of that pink extra gum. The way it got tough after just a few chews, but I still kept chewing it until my jaw was sore. I could feel the coolness of the ice cream cone, the way it melted too fast and dripped down the sides if I didn't lick it quick enough. That was our little tradition. First stop on the route, the Easy Mart, where my dad would buy his coffee and I'd get my gum and ice cream. I didn't care if it was cold out or raining. That cone was part of the magic. I ran into the kitchen where my mom was standing at the stove, flipping pancakes. The smell filled the whole house, warm and sweet. I barely noticed it. My mind was already out the door, in the passenger seat of that Bronco, windows down, wind in my hair. I grabbed my sneakers from the mat by the door and shoved my feet in without bothering to untie them. My hands fumbled with the laces, trying to knot them quickly. My mom glanced over her shoulder at me and smiled. "Someone's in a hurry," she said, turning back to the pancakes. I grinned and yanked open the front door. The cool air hit me, sharp against my face. I stepped out onto the porch, ready to run to the driveway. But then just like that, it hit me. It was like walking straight into a wall of fear. My whole body froze. My heart, which had been racing with excitement, now thudded painfully in my chest. My throat felt tight, like I couldn't breathe. My hands started to shake, and my knees felt weak, like they might give out under me. My vision blurred for a second, and I felt tears welling up in my eyes before I even understood why. I stood there, just inside the threshold of the house, unable to take another step. The world outside, the yard, the driveway, the trees at the edge of our property, suddenly felt wrong, like something terrible was waiting for me out there. A deep, cold dread settled over me, heavier than anything I'd ever felt before. And then I started crying, big, heaving sobs that I couldn't stop. I didn't even know what I was afraid of. I just knew deep in my gut that I couldn't go, that I shouldn't go. I turned back, stumbling inside, tears streaming down my face, gasping for breath. My mom heard me and came rushing over, her face filled with concern. I tried to speak, to tell her what was wrong, but the words wouldn't come. I just kept shaking my head, backing further into the house, away from the door. She knelt down in front of me, rubbing my arms, trying to calm me down. I remember the warmth of her hands, the soft fabric of her sweater brushing against my skin. The smell of her perfume mixed with the scent of pancakes. She kept saying it was okay, that I didn't have to go if I didn't want to. I didn't have to do anything that scared me. I could stay home. No one was making me go. Little by little, the sobs quieted, though I still felt shaken. My mom guided me back into the kitchen, sat me down at the table, and poured me a glass of orange juice. My hands trembled as I lifted it to my lips. The cold juice tasted bitter somehow, nothing like it usually did. I watched through the window as my dad's Bronco pulled into the driveway. I saw him wave from behind the wheel, his face bright with that easy smile I always loved. I wanted to wave back, to run out and join him, but the fear held me in place. My mom stepped outside to talk to him for a minute, then came back in and started making me breakfast. I remember the clatter of dishes, the sound of the spatula against the pan, the smell of butter and syrup filling the air again. I played with my Barbies at the table, trying to shake off the leftover fear. But it stayed with me, a heavy weight in my chest. I kept glancing at the clock, at the phone, out the window. Waiting. An hour passed, maybe a little more. The kitchen felt warm and safe, but I couldn't stop feeling like something was wrong. Like we were just waiting for something bad to happen. And then the phone rang. It was the old kind of phone, the one with the cord that stretched across the counter. My mom picked it up, and I watched her face as she listened. Her smile faded. Her eyes widened. She stopped stirring the pancake batter. I could see the worry flood over her, and my heart sank. Even before she hung up, I knew. I didn't know the details yet, but I knew something had happened. After she set the phone down, she knelt next to me, holding my hands in hers. Her hands were warm, but I could feel the faint tremble in them. She told me my dad had been in an accident. His Bronco had rolled over on the highway. He was okay, she said quickly before I could panic. Bumped up, bruised, but alive. A little shaken, but okay. He was on his way home now, with one of the other drivers bringing him back. I sat there, numb, listening as she explained what had happened. My dad had been driving along his usual route, just like always. Somewhere along the stretch of highway where the trees crowded close and the road curved sharply, he heard a noise from the back seat, like something had fallen or shifted. He turned his head for just a second to check, didn't see anything, and when he looked back at the road, he was too close to a mailbox. He swerved, overcorrected, and the Bronco went out of control. It rolled 3 times, she said, slid across the asphalt before coming to a stop in a ditch. The computer parts he was delivering were scattered everywhere. The passenger side, the side where I always sat, was crushed in, completely flattened. The emergency crew said anyone sitting there wouldn't have made it, but there was no one sitting there, just an empty seat. And on that seat, among the wreckage, they found only one thing that hadn't been destroyed, a small, pink package of extra gum. The same gum I always got at the Easy Mart. The gum I would have been chewing, probably, as I sat there next to him. My mom's voice got softer as she told me all this, like she didn't want to scare me any more than I already was. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Couldn't stop picturing that crushed seat, the twisted metal, the shattered windows. Couldn't stop imagining what would have happened if I'd gone with him. If I hadn't been so scared. If I'd stepped out that door like I did every other Saturday. I spent the rest of the day sitting quietly, my Barbies forgotten, my breakfast cold on the plate. I kept looking out the window, waiting for him to come home. When he finally did, walking slowly up the driveway with a limp and a cut on his forehead, I ran out to him and hugged him as hard as I could. I didn't care about the dried blood on his face or the grease on his hands. I just felt so thankful he was there, that we both were. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling for a long time. I thought about how close I'd come to being in that Bronco. I thought about the fear that had kept me inside. I didn't understand it, not really, but I was grateful for it. Grateful for whatever had made me stop at the door and turn back. I don't know what it was. Maybe just a gut feeling, something deep inside me that knew before I did. Maybe nothing at all. Maybe it was just chance. All I know is, I never felt the same about those Saturday mornings after that. I still loved my dad, still loved our time together. But I never asked to ride along again. And he didn't ask me either. We found other ways to spend time together. Simpler, safer ways. Walks to the park. Ice cream at the corner store. Just sitting together on the porch, watching the world go by. And every now and then, when I pass by a pack of pink extra gum at the store, I stop and look at it. I think about that day, about what could have happened. And I feel the same chill run down my spine, the same tightness in my chest, as I did standing at that door all those years ago. Because sometimes, without knowing why, you just know. And sometimes, that knowing is the only thing that keeps you safe. I was young back then. Desperate, really. You do things you don't think you ever would when you're at that point. And the funny thing is, you end up being good at them. I won't go into what line of work I was in, because it doesn't matter now. What matters is the feeling, the memory that lingers like a bad taste no matter how much time has passed. I didn't see it as wrong at the time. I was just doing what I was good at and trying to stay afloat. The kind of life where money comes fast if you're willing to do what most people wouldn't or couldn't. And I was good at being what people wanted. I had no trouble with clients. I knew how to handle myself. I was polite, charming even, and I knew when to be intimidating. Being tall and broad helped. People didn't try anything funny when they saw I wasn't some scrawny kid. Most of the time, my work was straightforward. You go in, you do what's expected, you leave. I stayed in control. I stayed smart. And that's probably why I never had many bad experiences. But that one night, it's burned into my head. I still think about it sometimes when I can't sleep, when the room feels too quiet and dark. It started like any other job. A friend of mine gave me a call about a client. He said the guy was solid, loaded, classy. I trusted this friend. We'd known each other for years, and he never sent me to someone who wasn't safe. I was told the guy liked things a certain way, liked discretion, liked people who were respectful, and didn't ask too many questions. That was fine with me. I'd done plenty of work like that. I arrived at the house just before dusk. It was one of those older houses, big and stately with thick walls and heavy doors. The kind of place where the windows are tall and narrow, with dark curtains that don't let much light in. The door opened before I even knocked. The man stood there, probably in his early 50s, dressed sharp but simple. Crisp shirt, dark slacks, polished shoes. He looked me over the way people do when they're measuring you up, but his face stayed pleasant, polite. His hair was silver at the temples, neatly combed back, his face clean-shaven. He invited me in with a gesture, no words. I stepped inside, and the smell hit me right away. Not bad, just different. A mix of wood polish, old books, maybe some kind of incense burned earlier. The air felt heavy. He led me down a long hallway, his shoes silent on the thick rug. The walls were lined with paintings, old portraits mostly, and the faces in them seemed to follow me as we walked. I tried not to stare. We reached the main room where he wanted to be. It was large, with a tall ceiling and heavy drapes drawn shut. Candles flickered here and there, their flames throwing long, soft shadows. In the corner, a side table held a silver tray with a glass of juice and a small plate of finger foods. I hadn't eaten much that day, so I took what was offered when he gestured. The juice tasted sweet, maybe too sweet, but I was thirsty, so I drank it down. We made small talk at first, nothing out of the ordinary. He was calm, polite, soft-spoken. Nothing about him seemed strange at that point. I began to relax a little, thinking this would be like any other session. I unpacked my things, the oils and lotions, the clean towels. He excused himself for a minute, came back dressed in a plain robe, barefoot. That's when I noticed the scars. His chest, his back, his arms. They were marked, crisscrossed with old lines that had healed unevenly. Some were thin and pale, others wider, jagged. I kept my face neutral. I'd seen all kinds of things. It wasn't my place to comment or stare. I started the massage, working the tension out of his shoulders, his neck, his back. He didn't talk much, just gave soft sighs now and then. I lost track of time. The candles flickered, and the room felt warmer, the shadows longer. The smell of the oils mixed with the faint smell of the candles. It was quiet except for my hands working his muscles and the soft creak of the table beneath him. After what must have been an hour, I thought we were done. I started to pull back, ready to wrap up. But that's when he reached over to the dark wood box on the table by the bed. I hadn't paid much attention to it before. It was solid, heavy-looking, polished to a deep shine. He opened it slowly, and inside were tools that caught the candlelight, sharp, clean, arranged in neat rows. Small blades, slender needles, things that looked like they came from a surgeon's kit. I froze for a second. He didn't say anything, just looked at me, then down at the box, then back at me. His eyes were calm, steady. I felt my heart pick up, but I didn't move. There was something about his gaze, something persuasive, something that reached inside me and quieted the part of me that wanted to say no. My head felt a little foggy, like I wasn't thinking as sharply as I should have been. The juice. I thought about the juice, but the thought slipped away as quick as it came. He guided my hand slowly to the tools, and I let him. What followed is hard to explain. I'd never done anything like it before. I'd never even considered it. But in that room, in that moment, it felt natural. Right even. I drew the blade across his skin, gently at first, watching the thin line of red bloom. He sighed a long, slow sound like relief. And I kept going. The more I did, the more I felt this strange rush, this high I can't really describe. My hands moved like they weren't mine, steady and sure. His skin was warm under my fingers, the scent of iron mixing with the oils and candle wax. The room felt alive, like the walls themselves were breathing with us. And the feeling that someone else was there grew stronger. I kept glancing at the corners of the room, half expecting to see a figure watching from the shadows. But it was just us. Just the two of us, and the flicker of the candles, and the sound of his breath, and the soft drip of blood onto the plastic sheet beneath us. I don't know how long it lasted. Time felt strange, stretched out and thin. When it was done, I helped clean him up, wiped down the tools, packed them back into the box. He paid me, more than I'd ever been paid before. A thick envelope of bills, no words, just a nod. I left the house feeling lightheaded, like I was floating. The night air was cold, sharp in my lungs. I walked for a while before finding a cab, trying to clear my head. In the days that followed, I kept thinking about it. The feeling of the blade in my hand, the look in his eyes, the strange satisfaction I'd felt. It scared me, how much I'd enjoyed it. I told myself it was the juice, that he must have slipped something in it. That made sense, didn't it? It explained the fog, the way my better judgment had seemed to melt away. But even now, I'm not sure. A few weeks later, my friend called again. Said the gentleman had asked for me. Offered even more money this time. All expenses paid, just name the time and place. I was tempted, I won't lie. The money was good. Too good. But the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. There was something about that night, something beneath the surface that I couldn't shake. Like I'd come close to something I didn't understand, something dangerous. I told my friend I'd left the city. I had, in fact. I packed up and moved within the month, put some distance between me and that life. My friend tried again a few times, sweetening the deal, saying the gentleman would even come to me. Each time I refused, a little more firmly than before. Eventually, the calls stopped. I started over in a new place, found different work, left that part of my life behind. I don't talk about it much. Not because I'm ashamed, I made my choices, but because it still leaves a strange taste in my mouth when I think about it. That night, that house, the way the candlelight flickered on those sharp tools, the look in his eyes as I pressed the blade to his skin. I can still see it, clear as day. And that's the end of it. I never went back. Never saw him again. Never held a blade like that again. I moved on. But every now and then, when the night is quiet and I'm alone with my thoughts, I remember. And I wonder how close I came to losing myself entirely. I wonder what might have happened if I'd said yes that second time. And I'm glad, truly glad, that I didn't. It was the middle of the night, probably close to 2 or 3 in the morning, though I didn't have a watch on me to check. I was 15 years old, and I had had enough of living at my dad's house. My parents were divorced, and I guess everything had been building up for a while. The arguments, the silences, the tension that hung in the air all the time. It just felt like I couldn't breathe there anymore. So that night, after tossing and turning in my bed and thinking about it for what felt like hours, I decided to leave. I didn't have much of a plan. I just knew I didn't want to be there anymore. I packed a small bag, just some clothes and a couple of things I thought I'd need. I didn't really think about food or water or anything like that. I wasn't planning for a long journey. I thought I'd just go to my mom's place. The problem was, I didn't know exactly where she lived. I knew the general area. I'd been there once or twice before, but it had been a long time. I figured I'd recognize it when I got there. I grabbed my bike. It was a bit old, and the chain squeaked sometimes, but it worked well enough. The tires were pumped, and the brakes were fine. I quietly wheeled it out of the garage, trying not to make any noise. The night was warm, one of those summer nights where the air feels heavy but comfortable at the same time. The sky was dark but clear. I could see stars scattered all over it, and the moon was out, not full, but bright enough to light things up a bit. I pedaled through the streets, the city mostly asleep. Denver at night had this quiet hum to it, distant cars, the occasional bark of a dog, the soft rush of air as I moved along. Streetlights cast long shadows, and everything felt bigger, emptier. The houses I passed were all dark, curtains drawn, windows reflecting the streetlights. Every so often I'd see a porch light left on, maybe someone waiting for a family member to come home, or maybe just a light forgotten. I wasn't scared at first. There was something peaceful about being out there alone, just me and the night. I felt free. The air smelled like grass and warm pavement, and there was a slight breeze that made the leaves on the trees rustle softly. I felt like I could ride forever, like I had left all the tension behind me. It took me maybe 40 minutes to get to the area where I thought my mom lived. But when I got there, I realized I didn't really know which street was hers. I rode up and down a few blocks, looking at houses, hoping something would look familiar. But it all looked different at night, and it had been so long since I'd been there. After a while, I had to admit to myself that I wasn't going to find it, not that night. So I turned around. I was tired now, and my legs ached a bit from all the pedaling. I started heading back the way I came, planning to just go back to my dad's place and figure something out the next day. Maybe I'd tell him I went for a ride to clear my head. I don't know what I was thinking. I just knew I didn't want to be out all night. The ride back felt different. The excitement had worn off, and now I was starting to feel how quiet everything really was. The streets felt emptier, if that was even possible. I started noticing sounds more, the clicking of my bike chain, the soft hiss of my tires on the pavement, the occasional creak of the bike frame. Every so often I'd hear something in the distance, a car engine, maybe, or a train horn far away. But mostly it was just me and the night. I got to the Cherry Creek bike path. I'd taken that way on the way out, and it seemed like the best way back. It was a nice path, usually busy during the day with people jogging or biking or walking their dogs, but at this hour it was deserted. The path ran alongside the creek, and the sound of the water moving along was steady and calming. Trees lined parts of the path, and in other parts it opened up, and you could see the city lights in the distance. I was about halfway back when I started to feel like I wasn't alone anymore. It wasn't anything I could see at first, just this feeling, this awareness that someone else was there. You know how you can just sense it sometimes? Like the air changes, or maybe it's your own nerves picking up on something your eyes haven't seen yet. I didn't look back right away. I just kept pedaling, trying not to let my mind run away with itself. But the feeling didn't go away. I started hearing it then, the soft sound of tires on the path behind me. At first I thought maybe I was imagining it, but no, it was real. Someone was back there, riding too. I tried to tell myself it was just another person out for a ride, though it was a weird hour for that. But it was Denver, and people did weird things sometimes. I kept pedaling, trying not to look back, not wanting to seem like I was nervous or anything. My heart was beating faster though, and I felt this tightness in my chest. The sound of the tires behind me got a little louder, a little closer, and then whoever it was pulled up next to me. I turned my head just enough to see him, and what I saw froze me in place for a second. It was a man, riding a bike like me, but he wasn't wearing anything. Not a shirt, not shorts, not shoes. Nothing. Just completely naked. Riding along like that was the most normal thing in the world. His skin looked pale in the moonlight, and I could see the muscles in his legs working as he pedaled. He didn't look at me. He just kept his eyes ahead, his face calm, like he wasn't even aware I was there. He passed me, not fast, but steadily, and soon he was ahead of me, the sight of his bare back and his pale skin moving away down the path. For a second I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Was this some kind of joke? Was he dangerous? Should I turn around? Should I stop? I kept pedaling, my eyes locked on him as he got further ahead. Part of me wanted to stop, to just let him get far enough ahead that I wouldn't see him anymore. But another part of me didn't want to be out there alone, stopped in the middle of the night on that dark path. So I kept going, keeping my distance, watching as he rode ahead of me, his pale form becoming smaller and smaller as he got further away. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, and my hands gripped the handlebars tighter than before. I was breathing harder, not from the pedaling, but from the adrenaline that was rushing through me. Every sound seemed louder, the creak of my bike, the rush of the creek beside me, the wind in the trees. I kept expecting him to stop or slow down or turn around or do something strange, but he just kept riding, steady and calm, until eventually he was out of sight. I didn't see him again after that. I kept going, faster than before, wanting to get off that path and back onto the streets where there were lights and houses and maybe other people. The rest of the ride back felt like it took forever. Every shadow seemed deeper, every sound sharper. I kept glancing behind me, half expecting to see him there again, but I never did. When I finally made it back to my dad's place, the sky was just starting to lighten a bit, that soft gray before dawn. I was sweaty and tired, my legs aching, my hands sore from gripping the handlebars so hard. I put my bike back in the garage as quietly as I could and slipped inside. The house was silent, and I went straight to my room, my heart still beating fast. I lay in bed for a long time before I could fall asleep, my mind replaying what had happened over and over again. The image of that man riding past me, so calm, so silent, burned into my memory. I kept thinking about what could have happened, what might have happened if things had gone differently. In the end, nothing really did happen. He just rode past me and kept going. But that was enough. That was more than enough. I never told my dad about it. I never told my mom either. It was just something that happened, something that stuck with me. After that night, I stopped going for bike rides in the middle of the night. I stopped thinking of the city at night as peaceful and quiet. It wasn't that I was scared of the man. I don't think he meant any harm. But the whole thing showed me how strange and unpredictable the world could be, especially when you're out there alone in the dark. I still ride my bike, but only during the day. I stick to the busy paths, the ones where there are always people around. And when the sun starts going down, I head home. Because no matter how quiet or empty the city seems at night, you never really know what's out there. And once you've seen something like that, it sticks with you. The sun was already climbing high in the sky when we rolled out in the old safari truck that morning. The kind of sky that is a deep, endless blue with just a few wisps of cloud, the kind that promises heat and dust. The guide, a man who I later learned had his own history with elephants, seemed calm and focused as he maneuvered the truck over the rough, dry ground. I was excited, maybe even a little overconfident. I had dreamed of this trip for so long, and now here I was, surrounded by the vast openness of Africa, with nothing but the grasslands and scattered trees as far as the eye could see. The smell of dry earth and vegetation filled the air, and there was that constant hum of life, insects buzzing, birds calling, the occasional distant bark of a baboon. It had started out as a normal safari drive. We saw antelope grazing, their ears flicking nervously at every sound. We spotted zebras clustered together, their stripes blurring when they moved. There were giraffes too, tall and strange, their heads high in the trees as they fed lazily. The morning light made everything golden and beautiful. The guide pointed out tracks in the dirt now and then, or stopped to show us where a leopard had clawed at a tree. I felt like I was in a dream, taking in all these sights, feeling so small in the middle of this wild world. After some time, we came upon a clearing. The grass was low there, and a few trees stood on the edges, casting patches of shade onto the hard ground. The guide brought the truck to a stop, and I remember thinking it was a good place to stretch my legs for a moment. The truck engine clicked as it cooled, and for a second everything was so still. I was halfway out of the truck, one foot on the ground, when suddenly the guide's face changed. His eyes went wide, and he raised his hand sharply toward me. His mouth opened, but I couldn't make out the words over the sudden pounding in my ears. It was like my body understood before my mind caught up. Danger was near. I scrambled back inside as fast as I could, heart racing. No sooner had I pulled the door shut than I heard it. That trumpeting sound, loud, wild, angry. It came from somewhere behind the trees, and then an elephant burst into view, massive and gray and terrifying. Her ears were flared out, her trunk high in the air, her tusks gleaming in the sun. She wasn't just walking, she was charging, and she was headed straight for us. The guide turned the key, and the truck coughed but didn't start. He tried again. Nothing but the sound of the starter grinding and the blood roaring in my ears. The elephant was closer now, close enough that I could see the dust kicking up around her feet, the wrinkles in her skin, the rage in her eyes. Another try. The engine turned over, sputtered, and died again. My hands were gripping the seat, so tightly my knuckles were white. The guide tried one last time, and for a heartbeat, I thought that was it, that this was how it would end. But on the fourth attempt, the engine finally caught, and with a lurch we were moving. The tires threw up dust as we tore out of there, the elephant still behind us, still trumpeting, but finally falling back as we picked up speed. I realized then why she had been so angry. As we sped away, I caught sight of a smaller elephant, a calf, half hidden in the trees where we had stopped. We had parked right between her and her baby without even realizing it. For a long time after that, no one said anything. The truck bumped along the track, and we just sat there, trying to catch our breath, our hearts still racing. Then, slowly, the tension began to lift. We started laughing. That strange kind of laughter that comes when you've been too close to something that could have gone so wrong. What else could we do? We were shaken, sure, but we were alive. We spent the rest of the day talking about it, going over every detail, the way the guide's hands shook on the wheel, the sound of the engine finally starting, the look in that elephant's eyes. It became this thing we couldn't stop talking about, as if saying it out loud over and over made it feel less real, or maybe made us feel safer. By late afternoon, the heat was heavy and the shadows were growing long. We were heading back toward camp, the air thick with the smell of dust and dry grass. The path twisted and turned through the bush, and I remember feeling tired, but in that good way, like you've had a full day and earned your rest. We were all looking forward to getting back, to having a meal and sitting around the fire, maybe with a cold drink. But the day had one more surprise for us. We came around a bend in the path, and there he was, a bull elephant, standing right in our way. At first, I thought he was just another elephant, and after what we'd been through earlier, I figured we'd just wait him out or find a way around. But then I noticed something strange about him. His movements were off, slow, a little unsteady, his head swaying more than it should. His eyes looked dull, not the sharp, aware eyes of the cow we had seen earlier. The guide tensed up again, his hands tight on the wheel, his body leaning forward slightly as he studied the bull. The elephant took a few steps toward us, and that's when I understood. He wasn't just any bull. He was drunk. There's a tree out there, I don't even know the name of it, but its fruit is sweet, sugary. The elephants know about it. They knock the fruit down, leave it on the ground to ferment, and then come back to eat it when it's good and ready. And when they do, they get drunk, properly drunk. That's what we had in front of us now. A massive, unpredictable, drunken bull elephant blocking our way home. The guide didn't move the truck. I didn't even breathe. The bull swayed, flapped his ears lazily, and then, without warning, he threw his head up and came at us. A charge, but not a full one, a false charge. He stopped short, kicking up dust, shaking his head. Then he stood there again, watching us, daring us to move. And that's how it went, again and again. Every time we tried to edge the truck back a little, or turn the wheels, he'd come at us, ears wide, trunk high, making sure we knew who was boss. We couldn't go forward. We couldn't just hit the gas and hope for the best. The truck wasn't built for speed, especially not in reverse, and on that uneven ground, we'd have been in trouble before we even got up to a decent pace. So we waited, and we waited. The hours dragged on. The sun sank lower, and the heat started to fade, but the tension didn't. Every muscle in my body felt tight. My mouth was dry, and I could feel sweat running down my back, even though the air was cooling. The bull kept us there, trapped, testing us with those false charges, daring us to make a mistake. The guide never took his eyes off him, his hands ready on the wheel, waiting for that one chance, that one moment when the bull might move off far enough or lose interest. I don't know how long it really was. It felt like forever. But at last, as the light faded and the first stars began to appear, the bull seemed to tire of the game. He turned slowly and began to wander off into the trees, still swaying, still unsteady, but finally moving away. We sat there a little longer, just to be sure, then the guide eased the truck forward, slow at first, then faster as the path cleared. We didn't speak, not at first. The relief was too big for words. By the time we reached camp, night had fully fallen. The sky was deep and dark, filled with stars, and the sounds of the bush were all around us. The calls of night birds, the chirp of insects, the distant cry of a jackal. We climbed down from the truck, our legs unsteady, not just from the ride, but from everything we'd been through. The fire was going already, and the sight of it, the smell of smoke and cooking food, was the most welcome thing I could imagine. We sat around it in silence at first, just soaking it all in. Then, slowly, the talking started. We went over it all again, every moment, every detail, trying to make sense of it, trying to laugh about it even though our hands still shook. I felt for the guide that night. I learned then that this had been his first trip back after 2 years away. He'd been out because of an elephant, charged, caught by a tusk, left with scars that went deeper than just his skin. And now this, his first day back, and he'd faced not one but 2 terrifying encounters. But he'd kept us safe. He'd kept his head. I had nothing but respect for him after that. We stayed up late that night, the fire crackling, the stars bright overhead, and little by little the fear gave way to gratitude. We were safe. We were lucky. And as I finally crawled into my tent, the sounds of the bush all around, I felt a deep, deep relief. It had been a long day, a hard day, but we'd made it through. And that was enough. I was around 12 or 13 at the time. I remember that night so clearly, every little sound, every shadow under the streetlights. It was one of those evenings where the air felt cool, not too cold, but just enough to make you pull your jacket tight around you. The sun had already set, and the world felt quiet in that way it only does after dark, where everything seems slower, calmer. I liked walking at that time. It gave me space to think, to breathe, and I liked how empty the streets felt. It felt like the whole world belonged to me for that half-hour walk I took every week to see my psychiatrist. I didn't live in a dangerous neighborhood. It was just your normal, quiet area with houses lined up along the streets, trimmed lawns, porches with rocking chairs or flower pots, and the occasional parked car. The sidewalks were cracked in places, weeds pushing their way up through the concrete, but nothing that felt unsafe. There weren't gangs or anything like that. I felt safe there, always had. That night, I was about halfway to my appointment, my mind wandering, my footsteps steady. The only sound was the soft scuff of my sneakers on the pavement and the distant hum of the city that you could always just barely hear. That's when I first noticed the car. A Cadillac. The kind of car that made a low, heavy sound as it rolled along, like it had weight to it, like it owned the road. It came down the street towards me, headlights casting long shadows that made the trees and parked cars look stretched out and strange. As it passed, I saw them. A bunch of teenagers, maybe a bit older than that, maybe late teens or early 20s. A mix of guys and girls. Some of them had their upper bodies hanging out of the windows, their voices cutting through the quiet night. They shouted things at me, jeers, taunts, words I couldn't always catch, but the tone said it all. They were mocking me, laughing at me like I was some joke to them. I kept my head down, kept walking. I didn't look at them. I didn't want to give them anything back. Just kept my pace steady, my eyes on the sidewalk in front of me. The car disappeared down the street, and I thought that was it. Just some kids messing around. But a minute later, maybe less, I heard that heavy hum of the engine again. I looked up, and there they were, coming down the street towards me again. Same car, same kids, same jeering voices. My stomach tightened. This wasn't just them passing by on their way somewhere. They were circling, watching me, focusing on me. I kept walking, but my heart was beating harder now. I didn't run. Not yet. I didn't want to show fear. I just kept walking like nothing was wrong, but in my head, I was trying to think. What should I do? Where could I go? Then the car came again. Third time. Same routine. They slowed as they passed, leaning out, shouting at me, laughing like this was some kind of game. I knew then that this wasn't going to stop. They weren't just passing through. They had decided I was their target for the night. As soon as they turned the corner and were out of sight, I broke into a jog, looking around for somewhere to hide. There was a yard with thick bushes, the kind that grew high enough to cover you if you crouched down. I dove behind them, the branches scratching at my arms as I pushed myself deep into the cover. I tried to make myself small, tried to slow my breathing so I wouldn't make any sound. The leaves rustled a bit as I settled in, but then everything went quiet again. I waited, listening. A minute passed, maybe less, and then I heard it, the low growl of the car as it came down the street again. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they'd hear it. The car rolled past, slow, like they were searching. But they didn't see me. No voices this time. No jeers. They just kept going, probably thinking I'd gone into one of the houses. I stayed put for a while after they passed. But then, stupidly, I thought it was over. I thought they'd given up, that they'd gotten bored and driven off to find something else to entertain themselves. So I stepped out from my hiding place, brushed the leaves and twigs off my clothes, and started walking again. I hadn't even gone half a block before I heard it, that engine again. That low rumble that now filled me with dread. I didn't even look. I knew it was them. They saw me, and the voices started up again, louder now, more aggressive. They turned the corner, and I knew I had to do something fast. I ran. I didn't look back. I just ran as hard as I could towards my destination. But I knew I wouldn't make it before they caught up. I was too far, and they were too fast. I spotted another place to hide, bushes in front of an apartment building, thicker than the last ones, darker. I ducked behind them, pressing myself as low as I could, trying to disappear. Not even a minute had passed before I heard a door open, and a man stepped out onto his stoop. He saw me right away. His voice was firm, demanding to know what I was doing. I froze, afraid he'd chase me off, but I turned my face up to him, and all the fear and panic I felt must have shown. I told him quickly, in a rush, about the car, about the kids, about how they'd been following me, harassing me. I could see his face change as he listened. He believed me. I could tell. Maybe it was the way my voice shook. Maybe the way I kept glancing down the street, waiting for that car to come back. He didn't say anything for a second, just stood there, sizing up the situation. He was older, maybe late 30s, early 40s. Not huge, but solid, with broad shoulders and arms that showed muscle under the sleeveless undershirt he was wearing. His face was serious, the kind of serious that made you feel safer just standing next to him. And then, right on cue, the car came back. It rolled up slowly, pulling to the curb right in front of us. The kids inside stared at me and at the man beside me. I noticed right away that there were fewer of them in the car now. It wasn't as packed as it had been. My stomach dropped as I realized what that meant. And then I saw them, 3 of them walking towards us from the opposite direction. They'd gotten out earlier, probably up the street, and were coming to box me in. But they hadn't expected me not to be alone anymore. They saw the man beside me, standing tall, arms crossed, giving them a look that said he wasn't going to let anything happen. They hesitated. I could see it. The kids on foot slowed down, glancing at each other, at the man, at the car. Their plan was falling apart. They weren't so bold anymore. Without saying a word, they changed course, heading for the car instead of me. They climbed in, and the car pulled away, faster this time, disappearing down the street. The man stayed with me for a moment, watching to make sure they were really gone. He offered to let me wait inside his apartment, or to stay with me until I felt safe. I thought about it. I really did. Part of me wanted to take him up on it, to stay hidden until I was sure. But I felt like they were done, that they'd gotten spooked, that they wouldn't be back. And I didn't want to be late. So I thanked him, told him I'd be okay, and started walking again. He nodded, went back inside, and closed the door behind him. I stared at that closed door for a second, hoping I hadn't made a mistake, hoping I wouldn't see that car again. The rest of the walk was quiet. The night seemed to settle again, like nothing had happened. The streetlights flickered in the same way, the breeze felt the same, but I felt different. I kept glancing over my shoulder, my heart still beating a little too fast, but the car never came back. I reached my psychiatrist's office, heart still pounding, hands still shaking just a bit. When I told him what happened, he listened carefully, concern on his face. He insisted on calling the police, and I didn't argue. The police came, took my statement, asked questions about the car, about the kids. I told them everything I could remember. They nodded, took notes, promised to keep an eye out. And that was it. I never heard anything more about it. On the walk home, I didn't take my usual route. I didn't want to risk it. I took side streets, kept to the shadows where I could. Every time I heard a car, my heart jumped into my throat until I saw it wasn't them. And I never saw that Cadillac again. Never saw those kids again either. After that night, I stopped enjoying those quiet walks after dark. The streets didn't feel peaceful anymore. They felt like they were watching me, waiting. But I was safe. That night ended with me making it home in one piece, and that was what mattered. I grew up in a house that was a bit different from what most of my friends were used to. It wasn't a normal house with clean lines and fresh drywall, or modern light fixtures, or anything like that. My house was old, really old. It had started out as a grain storage building on what was once a massive farm that covered the entire hillside. My great-aunt's husband's family had owned the land a long, long time ago. At some point, before anyone in my immediate family was even born, that grain storage was converted into a one-room schoolhouse. And much later, after the school shut down, it slowly became a house. The house I grew up in. If you looked at old maps, you could see it marked. The oldest map I ever found with it labeled was from 1844. I tried to track it back further, but at some point, records just stop. It's funny how history can get swallowed up like that. People forget. They move on. The house stood though. It always stood. The walls were thick, and the wooden floors creaked with every step. The windows were old and rippled with imperfections in the glass that made everything outside look warped, especially at night. I don't remember the first time I heard the story about the boy. Maybe my mom told me. Maybe it was my great-aunt. Maybe I just overheard it during one of those gatherings where adults sit around and talk after they've had a few too many drinks. But I knew it. Everyone who ever lived there seemed to know it. There was a boy, a student when it was still a school. One night, probably trying to impress his friends or prove he was braver than he was, he tried to break in. Maybe it was a dare, maybe just a dumb decision. The window he pried open came down on him, fast and hard, and it broke his neck. They said he died instantly, right there beneath the window he tried to climb through. I grew up with that story hanging over me, like one of those clouds that never seem to go away no matter how sunny the day is. It wasn't something I thought about every minute, but it was always there in the back of my mind. When the wind made the windows rattle at night, or when I heard strange creaks from the floors, it would drift into my thoughts. The house had its quirks. There was this little room we called the library. It wasn't a grand, fancy library like you'd see in some big old mansion. It was really just a walk-in closet that had shelves crammed full of books. Old books, new books, books with torn covers, books missing pages, books that smelled like dust and time. The door to the library always stuck a little when you tried to open it, and the window in there was stubborn too. My mom said it was because the house settled unevenly over the years. I guess that made sense. When I turned 17, I invited a few friends over. 5 or 6 girls, close friends from school. It wasn't anything wild. We weren't drinking or anything, just hanging out, eating too much junk food, laughing, and trying to scare ourselves like kids do. Someone brought out a Ouija board. I don't remember who it was, maybe Casey or Lauren, but once it was there on the table, we all got curious. That's just how it goes. We lit some candles for effect, like we thought that would make it more real. The rain had started earlier that evening, and by the time we started messing with the board, it was coming down pretty hard. The sound of it on the roof and against the windows filled the whole house, and in the quiet moments between our giggles and whispers, it sounded almost like footsteps, like someone was walking around outside. At first, we didn't expect anything. I thought the planchette wouldn't move at all, or if it did, it would just be one of the girls pushing it to mess with the rest of us. But almost right away, the thing started sliding across the board. Quick, jerky movements at first, then smoother. Letters. Words. We had to grab a notebook because the letters came so fast we couldn't keep track of them. The messages told a story. A 12-year-old boy. The same age as the boy in the story about my house. And then it said something that froze me. That he always watched out for me because my smile reminded him of his sisters. His sister Gertrude. Gertie. I didn't know what to do with that. It felt personal in a way that the stories never had. It felt close. And then the board asked me to go into the library and open the window. The same window where that boy had died all those years ago. I don't know why I agreed. Maybe it was peer pressure. Maybe I wanted to prove I wasn't scared. Maybe deep down, I wanted to believe in something bigger than myself. I got up, my legs shaking a little, and walked toward the library. The house was so quiet except for the rain. Every creak of the floor under my feet felt louder than it should have. When I reached the door to the library, I paused. My hand was on the doorknob, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I opened the door, and the smell of old books and dust hit me. The window was across the small room, and I could see the glass slick with rainwater. But the moment I stepped inside, something came over me. A feeling I can't really explain. It wasn't like I saw anything. There wasn't a ghostly figure or a face at the window. But the fear was so strong it felt like it reached down my throat and grabbed hold of me. My hands went cold. I could feel the hair on my arms stand up. I didn't even try to open the window. I turned around and ran back out, slamming the door behind me. My friends were still crowded around the board when I came back. They laughed nervously when they saw the look on my face, but no one made fun of me. I think they could tell I was genuinely shaken. We packed up the board not long after that. The fun had drained out of it. The rain kept falling, and we stayed up late talking about everything and nothing, trying to shake the feeling that the night had taken a strange turn. A few weeks later, I had a school project that involved researching local history, so I decided to look into my house. I wanted answers. I wanted to know if that story about the boy was true or just something people made up to scare kids. I spent hours in the library at school, going through old newspapers, land records, anything I could get my hands on. It turned out the boy was real. He died at age 12, just like the story said, and he had a sister named Gertrude. After that, every time I went into the library to grab a book, I found myself whispering an apology. I'd say, "Sorry for not opening the window." I don't even know why. Maybe I thought it would make things feel better. Maybe it was just habit after a while. The truth is, I felt guilty, like I had let someone down. But at the same time, I was mad. I thought about what the board had said, about the boy watching out for me. And I thought about my life, about the things I had been through that no one seemed to see or care about. My mom was a mean drunk. That's just the truth of it. She wasn't always that way. There were good moments. But when she drank, she could be cruel. And for 7 years, she lived with a man who made my skin crawl every time he was near. A man who should never have been near kids. And he was there, in my house, for 7 long years. If that boy had been watching out for me, he didn't do a very good job. And I resented him for that, if he was even real at all. But still, I couldn't stop myself from saying sorry every time I grabbed a book. Maybe I didn't want to make anything angry. Maybe I didn't want to take the chance, no matter how little I believed. Over the years, life moved on. I moved out when I was able. The house stayed the same though. The old windows still rattled in the wind. The floors still creaked. The library still smelled like dust and old paper. When I visit now, sometimes I stand outside and look at it. The hillside around it is overgrown in places where no one keeps it trimmed. The fields that were once farmed are wild with weeds and tall grass. And the house still looks out over it all, just like it always has. I don't know if that boy ever really existed beyond the records I found. I don't know if the Ouija board told us anything true that night, or if we just made connections where there weren't any. What I do know is that the house carries its past with it, heavy and quiet. And I carry it too. Every creak of the floor, every rattle of the window reminds me of it. I never did open that window. I don't think I ever will. And maybe that's okay. Maybe some things are better left the way they are. I'll start from the beginning because it helps me remember how everything built up over those years. When I was 12, my mom and I lived together in a 3-story apartment. It wasn't huge, but it felt that way because the top floor was all mine. I had my bedroom up there, a small bathroom, and a little hallway that led to the stairs. The walls were plain white, and the floors were covered with that cheap kind of carpet that never really feels clean, no matter how often you vacuum. The ceilings were low, and the windows were small, so the rooms always felt a bit dim, even during the day. My mom worked long hours, so most of the time, I was alone up there. I liked it that way at first. I could sit in my room, draw, listen to music, or just stare out the window. It was my own space, and I felt safe there. But after a while, small things started happening that I didn't notice at first. They seemed unimportant at the time. My mom would ask me where I had put something. A pen, a piece of mail, small documents she'd left in the living room. At first, I thought she was just being forgetful, or maybe I had moved them without thinking. But then things that belonged to me started disappearing too. A sketchbook I always kept on my desk. A pair of scissors I'd used the day before. Hair ties, pencils, small stuff. They'd vanish, and no matter how much I searched, I couldn't find them. The TV was another thing. It would turn itself off sometimes, or on. I'd be sitting in the living room with my mom, and the screen would suddenly go black, or switch on when no one had touched the remote. But these were small things. Annoying, yes, but not enough to make us think something was really wrong. We joked about it, blamed the old wiring, or maybe that we were just tired and imagining things. I didn't feel scared. Not then. When I turned 13, things started to feel different. My mood changed. I felt heavy all the time, like I was walking through water. Everything was harder than it should have been. Getting out of bed, going to school, even doing the things I used to enjoy. And at the same time, the strange things in the apartment became harder to ignore. One night stands out in my mind. I'd been crying. I don't remember exactly why anymore. Probably something that felt huge at the time. A fight with a friend, or just the weight of everything pressing down on me. I was lying there in bed, my face wet with tears, my pillow damp. And then I felt it. A hand, soft and gentle, stroking my cheek. Like how you'd calm a baby. I didn't see anyone. The room was dark, and I was alone. But the touch was real. I remember how comforting it felt, and how my sobs slowed down, and how I drifted back to sleep as if everything was okay. Another time, I had a friend over. We were standing in the little hallway on my floor, just talking. And suddenly, we heard footsteps on the stairs. Loud, fast. Someone running up, then down, then up again. We froze. The color drained from my friend's face, and I'm sure I looked just as pale. We waited, listening, but when we checked, there was no one there. The stairs were empty. The front door was still locked. We didn't know what to say. I could tell she was shaken, and so was I, but we tried to brush it off, laughing it away like it was nothing. A few days later, I was home alone. I was in my room, door open, listening to music. I heard the sound of the front door unlocking. I heard it open, then close. Clear as day. Footsteps on the stairs. My heart lifted a bit, because I thought my mom was home early. I called out for her, but there was no answer. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs, and I waited for her to appear. But no one did. I went down to check. The door was locked, just as it had been. No one was there. I stood there for a long time, trying to make sense of it, but there was no sense to be found. Over time, these things became part of the background noise of my life. The feeling of being watched, of not being alone even when I was. Seeing shapes out of the corner of my eye. My mom would mention it too, how she felt like someone was in the room with her, how she'd see things move just slightly. But neither of us wanted to believe it was something real. What could we do about it anyway? We just tried to ignore it. But as my depression deepened, the atmosphere in the apartment seemed to change with it. When I was 14, maybe 15, it got bad. I started cutting myself. It became a way to feel something, anything, when everything else felt numb. I tried to end it all twice. I don't like thinking about those moments, but they happened. During this time, my mom said she saw things too. A white fog, she called it, that would move up the stairs towards my floor. She'd see it out of the corner of her eye, then turn, and it would be gone. She didn't tell me about it right away. She didn't want to scare me, I guess. But when she did, I could tell she was worried. The night that stands out most was one I'll never forget. I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling that tight, panicked feeling in my chest. And then I heard it. Breathing. Heavy, slow, like someone asleep. But rougher, harsher. Coming from the couch across the room. My room was small, so the couch was only a few feet away. I thought at first I was imagining it. I held my breath to listen. It was still there. I couldn't see anything in the dark, but the sound was clear. I lay frozen, too scared to move. The breathing didn't stop. It went on and on, for what felt like hours. I couldn't bring myself to get out of bed. I just lay there, eyes wide, heart racing. When I finally did, I crept towards the door. As I passed the couch, the breathing softened, but as soon as I stepped into the hallway, it grew louder, filling my ears. I ran down the stairs to my mom's room. She let me sleep there that night. She went to check, and of course, there was nothing. But she heard it too, faintly, when she stood in my room. The breathing that shouldn't have been there. After that, I heard it now and then. During the day, at night. Always when I was alone. Always that same heavy sound, like something was waiting, watching. I started seeing flashes of light too. Every day. Bright bursts outside the window, like someone taking a picture with a camera. But when I'd look, there was nothing. No people, no cars, no reason for it. I thought maybe it was from the sun, but it happened even on cloudy days, even at night. There were no easy answers. We didn't move. We couldn't afford to. So I kept living there. The strange things didn't stop, but over time, I grew used to them. My focus turned inward. I fought my depression, slowly, painfully. It took years. I started seeing a counselor. My mom helped as much as she could. I worked on myself. It wasn't easy. There were good days and bad, but over time, the good days started to outnumber the bad. I stopped hurting myself. I found small things that made me feel better. Drawing again, going for walks, music. And as I got better, the strange things started to fade. The breathing stopped. The flashes of light became less frequent, then disappeared altogether. The feeling of being watched slowly went away. The apartment felt empty again, in a good way. Quiet. I don't know if any of it was real, or if it was all in my head, shaped by how I felt at the time. Maybe my depression made me notice things that weren't really there. Or maybe the weight of my sadness filled the apartment with a kind of energy, and when I got better, that energy left. I'll never know for sure. But I do know that as my mind healed, the apartment felt like just an apartment again. Just walls and floors and windows. Just a home. Now I'm 25. I haven't felt anything like that in years. No breathing, no lights, no strange sounds. I still think about it sometimes. The way those years felt. Heavy, dark, like I was carrying something I couldn't see. But I made it through. And now when I look back, I feel grateful. Not for the fear or the sadness, but for making it out the other side. The apartment didn't change. I did, and that made all the difference. Around 10 years ago, something happened that I still think about sometimes, usually late at night when I can't sleep. I was probably about 16 at the time, still living at home with my mom in the house I grew up in. It was one of those ordinary weekday afternoons. I had just come home from school, tossed my backpack on the floor of my room, and was making myself a sandwich in the kitchen when I heard the mail slot clatter open and closed. That sound didn't usually mean much. It was just bills, junk mail, maybe a flyer for some local pizza place. But that day it turned out to be different. A few minutes later, I heard my mom calling me from the front hallway. I could tell from her voice that something was off. She didn't sound angry or happy or anything familiar, just kind of confused. When I came out, she was standing there holding a plain white envelope in her hands. I remember it clearly because the envelope didn't look like the usual mail. There was no return address, just her name and our house address written in neat, almost too careful handwriting. And under the stamp in the corner, all it said was Florida. That was it. No city, no zip code, no sender's name. Just Florida, like that was enough. My mom had this puzzled look on her face. She opened the envelope slowly, like she was expecting it to be a mistake or maybe something official. Inside was a single photo and a piece of paper folded in half. She pulled out the photo first. It was old, black and white, and a little faded, but you could still see the image clearly. It was a baby sitting on a blanket in what looked like a grassy backyard, squinting up at the camera. I didn't recognize the baby at first, but my mom did. She stared at it for a few seconds, and then she turned pale. She sank down onto the bottom step of the stairs and just kept looking at it. I picked up the folded paper that had fallen to the floor. It was a small note, written in the same kind of neat, careful handwriting that was on the envelope. The note was short. It just said, "I think you sent this by mistake." That was all. No signature, no explanation. Just that one sentence. I asked her what it was, and she finally said, her voice kind of flat, "That's me. That's my baby picture." And I could see she was telling the truth. The baby had the same round cheeks I'd seen in other old family photos of her, the same little curl of hair at the top of her head. It was her, no doubt about it. She told me that picture had been in a box in the basement for as long as she could remember. It wasn't the kind of picture she'd ever sent to anyone. She said it had been in the same old shoebox, with other photos and keepsakes from her childhood, untouched for years. More than 20 years, she said. Maybe longer. We lived over 1,000 miles from Florida. We didn't know anyone there. We had no relatives down there, no friends who'd moved away. No one at all. That's what made it so strange. How could a baby picture that had been in a sealed box in our basement end up in the hands of someone in Florida? For a few days, we tried to make sense of it. My mom went down to the basement that evening and pulled out the box. The photo was missing from the stack where it should have been. The rest of the pictures were there, untouched, but that one was gone. There was no sign that the box had been disturbed otherwise. The lid had been on tight. There was no damage, no sign of mice or water, or anything else that could have made the photo fall out or go missing. It was like it had just been plucked out by an invisible hand. We thought maybe it had something to do with the people who'd lived in the house before us. But that didn't add up either. My mom had moved into the house when she was still a kid herself, and that box had been hers the whole time. Nobody else had access to it. And even if they had, how would it have ended up in Florida all these years later? We tried to think of every possible explanation. Maybe someone had broken into the house at some point, gone down to the basement, opened the box, and taken just that one picture for some reason. But that didn't make sense. There was nothing valuable in that box, just old photos and papers. And nothing else in the house was missing or disturbed. Besides, who would steal a baby picture and then send it back with a polite note? My mom even called the post office, trying to figure out if they could tell her anything about the envelope. But they couldn't help. Without a return address or anything to track it, there was nothing they could do. They suggested maybe it was some kind of prank. But who would go to that much trouble for a prank that wasn't even funny? We both felt uneasy for a long time after that. Every time the mail came, we'd look twice, wondering if something else strange would show up. For months, we kept expecting another envelope, maybe with another picture or another note. But nothing ever came. It was just that one envelope, that one photo, that one sentence. After a while, the whole thing faded into the background of life. We moved on. I went off to college, my mom kept working, and we didn't talk about it much. But sometimes, when I came home to visit, I'd find myself glancing at the mail when it came in, half expecting to see another plain envelope with no return address. And sometimes late at night, I'd think about that photo and wonder where it had been all those years. Who had it? How did they get it? Why did they send it back? Years later, after I graduated, I came home for a longer visit. My mom and I were sitting on the back porch one evening, talking about all kinds of things, when the subject of that envelope came up again. I asked her if she'd ever gotten any other strange mail. She said no, just that one time. But then she said something that stuck with me. She said she'd always wondered if maybe, somehow, it had been her own fault. I asked her what she meant, and she said she remembered that when she was in her early 20s, before I was born, she'd been going through some old things, trying to clean out the basement. She couldn't remember exactly what she'd done with everything, but she thought maybe, just maybe, she'd put some stuff in a donation box or a yard sale pile by mistake. She didn't remember putting the photo in there on purpose, but it was possible it had gotten mixed in with other things. Maybe someone had bought an old book or a box of dishes at that yard sale, taken it home, and found the picture tucked inside. Maybe that person moved to Florida later, found the picture again, and thought my mom had sent it by mistake. Maybe they were just trying to be kind, returning something they figured had sentimental value. It was the only explanation that really made sense. We couldn't prove it, of course. We couldn't trace the picture's path or figure out who had sent it, but it felt more believable than anything else. No ghosts, no mysteries that couldn't be explained. Just a simple human mistake, the kind of thing that could happen without anyone meaning for it to. Maybe the person who sent the photo back didn't even live in Florida originally. Maybe they just ended up there over the years and found the picture again while cleaning out a drawer. Thinking about it that way made the whole thing feel less eerie. It didn't erase the strangeness of getting that envelope out of the blue, but it made it easier to accept. It was a reminder that sometimes the things that seem most mysterious have the simplest explanations. A reminder that the world isn't always as spooky as our minds can make it when we don't have all the pieces of the puzzle. Since then, my mom has kept the picture in a frame on her dresser. I think she likes having it where she can see it, a reminder of her childhood, and maybe a reminder that not every strange thing is as sinister as it first seems. And me, I still check the mail now and then with a little extra attention, but I don't feel that chill down my spine anymore when I think about that envelope. It was just one of those weird things that life throws at you sometimes, and then you move on. When I was 16, my friends and I had this small apartment in a building that my friend's parents owned. It wasn't anything fancy. It was old, really old. You could tell just by looking at it that the place had seen a lot over the years. Cracks in the walls, creaky floors, and this smell that always hung around, kind of like damp wood and dust no matter how much you cleaned. The building was in Chicago, on a street that didn't see much action anymore. My buddy's dad used to tell us about how the place was connected to the old tunnels Al Capone and his guys had built way back when. Most of them were blocked off, sealed behind brick walls and metal doors. But even knowing they were blocked didn't stop us from thinking about what might still be hidden down there. It gave the whole place this weird vibe, like the past was always kind of watching. We didn't have much money, so we made do. One of the things we'd do was head up to the roof to smoke. It was the only place we could really go where no one would bother us. But getting to the roof wasn't easy. You had to go through the attic first, and the attic was a nightmare. There weren't any lights. The wiring up there was so old and busted that no one wanted to risk flipping a switch, even if there had been bulbs. So we used whatever light we had on us, and back then, that meant our old flip phones. The kind that barely lit up a few feet in front of you. Mine was one of those clunky Motorola phones with the small screen and the weak little light on the front. It was enough to not trip over your own feet, but that's about it. That night started like any other. It was already late, maybe close to midnight. The air felt heavy, like it does sometimes before a storm. Manny and I decided to go up for a smoke. We didn't say much to each other. We'd done this so many times that we didn't need to. I remember grabbing my pack of smokes and my lighter and stuffing them into my pocket. As we headed for the stairs, I realized I had to piss. I told Manny to go ahead, that I'd catch up in a minute. He didn't say anything, just nodded and kept going. I went into the apartment bathroom, did my thing, and then made my way up toward the attic. I remember how quiet it was. The kind of quiet that makes your ears ring a little. The building always made noises, pops and creaks and the occasional groan as it settled. But at that moment, it felt like everything was holding its breath. I climbed the stairs, opened the door to the attic, and was hit by that smell. Old wood, dust, and something else I couldn't place. I flipped my phone open and held it out in front of me. The dim light barely made a dent in the dark, but I could see just enough to not walk into anything. I started across the attic toward the ladder that led to the roof. My footsteps echoed softly on the wooden floorboards. I kept the phone pointed ahead, watching for any obstacles. That's when I noticed it, movement, just ahead of the light's reach. A shadow, darker than the rest of the darkness. It moved like a person, smooth and steady, like someone who knew where they were going. My first thought was that it was Manny. It had to be him. We messed with each other all the time, sneaking up and trying to scare one another. I stopped walking and called out, trying to sound annoyed more than anything. I said, "Manny, I know it's you. Quit fucking around." The figure didn't stop. It kept moving toward the far corner of the attic, where the roof ladder was. I followed, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I was sure it was him. I kept my phone light pointed at it, but no matter how I moved, the shadow stayed just out of reach, like it was always one step ahead. I called out again, louder this time. "Stop playing, I know it's you." I felt a little irritated, but also a little uneasy. Something felt off. The air felt thicker, heavier. I could feel the weight of it in my chest. Then I heard it. A voice from downstairs, faint but clear. What? It was Manny. His voice carried up through the building, unmistakable. He wasn't up here. He was downstairs. I froze. My mouth went dry. I stood there for a second, staring into the dark, trying to make sense of it. The figure had stopped moving. It stood there in the far corner, as still as a statue. I felt like it was looking at me, though I couldn't see any eyes or features. Just this shape in the dark. My hand shook as I held up my phone. The light flickered, weak and useless. I felt my heart hammering in my chest, loud enough I thought whoever, or whatever, that was could hear it. I didn't wait. I turned and ran. My feet pounded the floorboards as I made my way back toward the attic door. I nearly tripped on a loose board, but I caught myself and kept going. I burst through the door, down the stairs, and into the apartment. Manny was there, sitting on the couch, talking to his girlfriend on the phone. He looked up, confused. I stood there, out of breath, trying to explain what had happened. I couldn't get the words out at first. My hands were shaking. Finally, I managed to tell him. He just stared at me. I could tell he didn't know what to say. I didn't want to go back up there. I didn't want to see that shadow again. People always try to tell me I imagined it, that maybe it was my own shadow playing tricks on me. But that doesn't make sense. My phone light was in front of me, pointed forward. There was no way my shadow would be ahead of me, moving like that. And it wasn't just the shape. It was the way it moved. Smooth, purposeful, like it knew exactly where it was going, like it didn't care that I was following it. I think about it sometimes, more than I'd like to admit. I try to tell myself there's a reasonable explanation. Maybe someone else was up there somehow. Maybe there was a gap in the bricks or a draft that made the shadows dance. But deep down, I know what I saw. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't my imagination. I saw a figure, a shadow person, and I don't care what anyone says. I wasn't alone up there. After that night, I stopped going up to the roof. Manny and the others still did sometimes, but I always found an excuse not to. I didn't want to risk seeing that thing again. The attic felt different after that, too, like it was watching, waiting. I started to notice little things, cold spots, weird noises I couldn't place, the feeling of being watched even when I was alone. Maybe it was just my nerves, but it felt real enough to me. We moved out not long after. The building was falling apart anyway, and Manny's parents were talking about selling it. I didn't argue. I was glad to be out of there. I haven't been back since. Sometimes I wonder if whoever bought the place ever goes up into that attic. If they ever see what I saw. I hope they don't. I really do. What sticks with me the most isn't just seeing that shadow. It's how normal everything felt at first. Just another night, just another trip up to the roof. And then in a second, it all changed. That's the part that gets me. How fast things can go from normal to something you can't explain. Something that stays with you long after it's over. That's what I think about when I let myself think about it at all. And no matter how much time passes, no matter how far I am from that place, I'll never forget it. I was home alone with my grandmother that night, and I remember every second of it like it's burned into my brain. My Nana had been living with us ever since her stroke. It had been a few months, but she wasn't the same after it. The whole right side of her body was paralyzed, and she couldn't talk anymore. I was the one taking care of her most of the time. I didn't mind. She'd looked after me when I was a kid, so it was my turn now. But that night, I don't think I'll ever forget it. It was Easter. My mom and aunt had made this big dinner earlier in the day, and after everyone ate, they both decided to go out for a bit, leaving me alone to clean up the mess they left behind. I didn't blame them. They deserved a break. But they sure didn't leave me an easy job. Plates, glasses, pans, towels, bits of food, all of it was scattered everywhere. The table was a wreck, the counters were sticky, and the floor had crumbs and bits of napkins all over it. And it was late, about midnight. I was exhausted. I hadn't really sat down since dinner. I'd gotten Nana to bed about an hour before, and thankfully she'd been quiet when I tucked her in. I needed that small blessing because I didn't have the energy for anything else. The past week had been hard on her. Some nights, after I'd put her to bed and turned off the light, she'd start screaming. I mean, really screaming. This gut-wrenching, terrified scream like she was seeing something I couldn't. I'd rush in, my heart pounding, and there she'd be sobbing, yanking on her own hair, her face pale and wet with tears. It killed me because she couldn't tell me what was wrong. I'd ask yes or no questions. That was all we could do. She'd nod or shake her head, or sometimes try to point. I was desperate to understand. One night, through a lot of those yes/no questions and gestures, she pointed up at the back corner of her room, like something was up there. She reached for this old photo on her dresser, one of her with her parents. It was like whatever she saw had something to do with them. Another time, she clutched this little crucifix my mom had left on her nightstand. She'd never been religious. Not in my lifetime anyway. But she grabbed that cross like it was the only thing keeping her safe. The worst was when she tried to mimic what she saw. She'd open her mouth wide and hold it there, like whatever it was had this gaping mouth. It chilled me to the bone, but what could I do? There was never anything there when I looked. But that night, she didn't scream. She was quiet. I told myself maybe it was finally over, that she was getting better somehow. I tried to focus on cleaning. I grabbed this stack of towels off the couch. They'd been used earlier when someone spilled wine, or maybe when the kids were playing outside. I don't know. I was so tired by that point everything was a blur. I straightened up, ready to carry them to the kitchen, when I heard voices. Men's voices. Clear as day. My heart nearly stopped. The first thing my mind went to was the TV. Maybe I'd accidentally turned it on when I put the remote down. Maybe the noise was just some late-night show. But the TV was off. The room where the TV was, the den, was dead bolted from the inside. No way anyone got in there. I picked up the remote, hit the power button a few times. Nothing. The screen stayed black. The voices faded, turning into what sounded like water moving through the pipes. I tried to convince myself that's all it had been. Maybe the house settling, maybe the old pipes groaning. The house was built in the 40s. It made noises. I was just tired. That's all. I turned back to get those towels, determined not to let my imagination get the better of me. But when I came back, I noticed something odd. Papers that had been on the table were on the floor now. I stared at them. I knew they hadn't been there before. I bent down, picked them up, put them back where they belonged. Maybe I'd brushed against the table and knocked them off. That's what I told myself. Just clumsy. Just tired. I kept going, grabbed a stack of dirty dishes and started toward the kitchen. As I passed the bathroom, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. I froze. There was a figure, a small man, maybe no taller than my chest, wearing a hat, moving in there. Like he was dancing. My whole body went cold. I whipped around, but when I looked straight in, there was nothing. No one. Just the dim light from the hall reflecting off the mirror. I was angry now. Angry at myself for letting my mind play tricks on me. Angry at how tired I was. I shut the bathroom door hard, like that would settle things, and I went into the kitchen. That's when I saw it, the TV cable, the one from the dead-bolted room, lying right in the middle of the floor. I stared at it, my brain struggling to make sense of it. No one could have brought it out. I picked it up, set it on the table. I wasn't going to let this nonsense stop me. I had dishes to do. I wasn't about to let myself fall apart over nothing. I turned on the water, started scrubbing. I hummed, partly to calm myself, partly to drown out the weird silence of the house. I tried to convince myself that nothing was wrong, that I was imagining things because I was exhausted. But then it happened. 3 loud, sharp knocks. Not at the door. Not on the window. On the bottom of the sink. Like someone or something was inside the cabinet beneath, knocking on the metal of the sink bowl. My breath caught in my throat. I stood there, dish in hand, heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the dish I just dropped into the sink had caused an echo. I picked it up, let it fall again. No sound, just the clatter of the dish. I waited, listened. Silence. My hands trembled, but I forced myself to keep scrubbing. I didn't want to lose it. I didn't want to give in to whatever was trying to scare me. Then the cabinet door swung open. Slowly, deliberately. It hit my knee once. Then, after a pause, it hit me again. Like something was pushing it out in small, careful movements. I froze, my mind racing. I could feel the blood drain from my face. That was it. I'd had enough. I dropped the dish into the sink, turned off the water, and backed out of the kitchen. I went straight to the living room, sat down hard on the couch, and started whispering the Lord's Prayer. I'm not religious. Not at all. But it was the only thing that came to mind. The only thing I could think to do that felt like it might help. I said it over and over, quietly but firmly, until the horrible prickling feeling that had settled on me finally lifted. Like a weight was gone. Like whatever had been there wasn't anymore. After a while, I got up, heart still racing but feeling a little steadier. I checked on Nana. She was sleeping peacefully, breathing slow and even. I stood there for a long time, watching her, making sure she was really okay. That thing, whatever it was, whether it was my imagination or something else, I didn't want it near her. I didn't want it anywhere near us. And here's the thing. After that night, Nana never screamed at night again. Not once. I don't know if it was because whatever she saw or felt had gone, or because I had done something by standing my ground. Maybe it was just coincidence. Maybe it was nothing at all. But she slept through the nights after that, and so did I. I still don't have an explanation for what happened. I don't tell the story much, because what can I say? No one would believe it. I wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't lived it. The house eventually got sold after Nana passed. I don't miss it. I don't miss the creaks or the cold spots, or the way it sometimes felt like someone was standing right behind you. I'm glad to be rid of it. But sometimes, when the night is very quiet and I'm washing dishes alone, I remember. And I wonder if something, somewhere, is still knocking, waiting for someone to listen. It was a couple of years ago when this happened, but I can still remember it like it was yesterday. My family and I were on vacation in Slovenia, in a town called Bled. It's a beautiful place, like something out of a postcard. The lake was calm and smooth, with that small island right in the middle, the one with the church that everyone takes pictures of. The mountains stood all around like giants, their peaks still holding onto patches of snow, even though it was warm down below. The air smelled fresh, like pine trees and clean water. Everything about the place felt peaceful. At least, that's how it seemed at first. We had arrived in Bled after a long drive, tired but excited to see the sights. My parents had booked us into a small hostel near the lake. It wasn't anything fancy, just a plain old building with creaky floors and simple wooden furniture. The kind of place that smelled a little like damp wood and dust, but in a way that wasn't unpleasant. The windows had thin curtains that didn't really block out much light, so at night the moonlight would sneak in and cast pale shadows across the room. Our room was on the second floor, at the end of a long hallway. The hallway itself always felt a little too quiet. Even though the hostel was pretty full, it seemed like no one ever made any noise. Just the sound of our footsteps, and sometimes the groan of the old floorboards beneath us. Our room was small, with 2 single beds pushed together for my parents, a couch that folded out into a bed for one of my sisters, and a narrow bed for me. My bed was near the window, and my sister's couch bed was at the foot of mine. The room felt cramped, but we didn't mind. We were just happy to be on vacation. On our second night, I remember feeling restless. We had spent the day walking around the lake, taking a small boat out to the island, and hiking up to one of the viewpoints to look down at the water. By the time we got back to the hostel, we were all exhausted. After dinner at a little restaurant down the street, we went straight to bed. But for some reason, I couldn't fall asleep. Maybe it was the excitement of being in a new place, or maybe it was the unfamiliar creaks and groans of the old building. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet breathing of my family. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the moon that slipped through the thin curtains. The shadows of the window frames stretched across the floor, moving slightly as the curtains swayed in the faint breeze. It must have been close to midnight when I heard it, a soft creak from the hallway, like someone stepping carefully on the wooden floor outside our room. At first, I thought maybe it was one of the other guests, someone coming back late from the town. But then I heard it again, closer this time. Another slow, deliberate step, right outside our door. I froze, my heart starting to race. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just someone getting to their room, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Then, I heard the door handle move. Just a tiny sound, but clear in the stillness of the night. The handle turned slowly, as if whoever was on the other side was trying not to make any noise. And then the door opened. I didn't understand at first. I thought maybe it was my dad getting up for some reason. but he was still lying next to my mom, both of them asleep. I couldn't move. My body felt heavy, like I was pinned to the bed. My mouth felt dry, and I wanted to call out, but no sound came. The door opened wider, and I saw him. Just a dark shape at first, a silhouette against the lighter wall of the hallway. He was big, taller than my dad, broad-shouldered. The man stepped into the room so slowly, like he was gliding. The floor creaked softly under his weight. The moonlight caught his face for a moment as he moved closer, and I could see enough to know he wasn't someone I recognized. His face was rough, unshaven, with deep lines and a hard expression. His eyes were dark, but they seemed to shine a little in the faint light. He didn't look at me at first. He was focused on my sister, asleep on the couch at the end of my bed. I felt sweat trickle down my face. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he would hear it. I couldn't believe what was happening. My mind raced, trying to think of what to do. I wanted to shout, to wake everyone up, but I couldn't. I was completely frozen, trapped by my own fear. The man took another slow step towards the couch. He leaned down slightly, like he was reaching out. I don't know if it was the movement or something else, but at that moment, he seemed to sense me watching him. His head turned, and his eyes met mine. That look, I'll never forget it. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a second, everything seemed to stop. The room felt colder, like the warmth had been sucked out of it. We just stared at each other. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Then, just as silently as he had come in, he straightened up and backed away. He moved fast this time, slipping out through the door and pulling it shut behind him without a sound. I lay there, staring at the door, my body still frozen. I don't know how long I stayed like that, listening for any other sounds, waiting for something else to happen. But the hallway stayed quiet. The night stayed still. Eventually, after what felt like forever, I forced myself to move. I sat up slowly, my whole body shaking. I looked over at my sister. She was still asleep, completely unaware of what had almost happened. My parents didn't stir. I wanted to wake them, to tell them, but part of me was still too scared. I kept thinking, what if he was still out there? What if he came back? I stayed awake the rest of the night, sitting up in bed, watching the door, listening to every little creak and groan of the building. Every time the wind made the curtains move, I jumped. Every shadow looked like it could be him coming back. When the morning finally came and the light started to fill the room, I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. I hadn't slept at all. As the sun rose higher and the sounds of the other guests started to drift through the building, I felt a little safer. When my family woke up, I told them what had happened. I tried to explain how real it had been, how I'd seen him, how he'd looked at me. But they didn't believe me. They thought I must have been dreaming, or that my imagination had gotten the better of me after reading those scary stories the night before. I didn't argue with them. I just let it go. But I knew what I had seen. I knew I hadn't imagined it. That day we visited a castle nearby, a place that looked straight out of a horror movie. Old stone walls, narrow staircases, dark rooms that smelled of damp and age. The kind of place that made you feel like you were being watched. I couldn't enjoy it. Everywhere we went, I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that man's face again. The town itself, with its old buildings and narrow streets, only added to the feeling. It all seemed darker, more threatening than it had the day before. The rest of our stay in Bled, I barely slept. Every night I lay in bed, listening, watching the door, waiting. But he never came back. Whoever he was, whatever he wanted, he was gone. Still, I couldn't shake the fear. It stayed with me long after we left Slovenia, long after we got back home. Even now, sometimes when I'm lying awake at night, I think about that night in Bled. The way he moved, the look in his eyes, the silence of it all. And I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been awake. What would have happened if he hadn't seen me watching him? I never found out who he was or how he got in or why he left so suddenly. I never saw him again. But I'll never forget that night, and I'll never forget the way I felt, lying there in the dark, too scared to move, too scared to speak, watching as a stranger stepped into our room and reached out towards my sister. And I'll never stop being grateful that for whatever reason, he chose to leave. I had never thought much about break-ins before. The neighborhood always felt safe enough, and I liked to believe we lived in one of those quiet corners of Florida where nothing truly bad happened. But that changed the week I heard about 2 houses down the street getting broken into. The first one was just a few blocks away, An older couple who came home to find their back door kicked in, drawers emptied onto the floor, and their TV gone. The second was even closer, a house I passed every day on my way to work. Same story, front window smashed, jewelry gone, no sign of who did it. That news settled in my mind like a stone. I couldn't shake it. Every creak in the house at night made my heart race. I found myself double-checking the locks before bed, walking around the house and pulling on the door handles, making sure the windows were shut tight. My wife noticed how jumpy I'd become, but she didn't say anything. Maybe she felt the same way. Our daughter was just a few months old then. She was the reason I couldn't let it go. Every time I saw her little face, the way she'd look up at me when I held her, it made the thought of someone breaking in feel that much worse. I couldn't stand the idea of something happening to her or to my wife. So I did what I thought I needed to do. I went out and bought a gun. I'd never owned one before, but it felt like the right thing. I kept it unloaded, hidden under the bed, just in case. I didn't tell many people. Only my brother knew, and I think he understood why. A couple of weeks went by after I bought the gun. Life started to feel normal again. I tried to let the fear fade into the background. The neighborhood seemed quiet, no new break-ins, nothing on the local news. I kept up the habit of checking the doors and windows, but the edge of the worry softened a little. Then came that Friday night. I remember it clearly because it had been a long week at work, and I didn't feel like cooking. My wife had been home with the baby all day, so I offered to go out and pick up dinner. We decided on Chinese food, from this little place a few miles away that we both liked. I called in the order, grabbed my keys, and headed out. It was already dark by the time I pulled into the restaurant's parking lot. The lot was mostly empty, just a couple of cars parked near the entrance. Inside, the place smelled like soy sauce and fried food. The woman behind the counter recognized me, handed me the bags with a smile, and I paid. It was routine, nothing strange. I stepped back outside, the warm Florida air thick and heavy even at night. I didn't notice anything unusual at first. I walked to my car, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. It wasn't until I pulled out onto the main road that I saw the car behind me. I don't know what kind it was exactly, maybe a dark sedan, headlights bright in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it. The road was busy enough, people out for dinner, heading home, doing their Friday night things. But after a few turns, I realized that same car was still behind me. I told myself it was nothing. Florida drivers were unpredictable. Maybe they just happened to be going the same way. But as I kept driving, taking turns I wouldn't normally take, the car stayed with me. My heart started beating faster. I felt that familiar rush of fear, but I tried to stay calm. I told myself not to panic, not to do anything stupid. I checked the rearview mirror again and again. The car's headlights were steady, too steady. Then the honking started. Just one long blast at first. Then another. And another. I didn't know what to make of it. Were they trying to warn me of something? Was something wrong with my car? I didn't know, and I didn't want to find out. The honking was loud, insistent. Then they started flashing their lights, high beams flicking on and off, filling my mirrors with blinding light. That was when I stopped thinking this was just coincidence. This wasn't normal. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. I pressed the gas a little harder, trying to put some distance between us. My mind was racing. Were they trying to run me off the road? Were they trying to get me to stop? I didn't want to stop. I didn't want to pull over and find out what they wanted. I turned down side streets I didn't even know. I just wanted to lose them. But they stayed with me every turn, every stop sign, every curve. The honking, the flashing, it all kept going. My heart felt like it was going to pound out of my chest. I thought about calling the police, but I couldn't bring myself to take my hands off the wheel. Eventually, I saw my street up ahead. I didn't know if it was a smart move, but I just wanted to get home. I wanted to get inside, to get my wife and baby safe. I turned onto my street, the car still behind me. I pulled into the driveway fast, slammed the car into park, grabbed the bags of food, and ran inside. The first thing I did was tell my wife to take the baby and get into the bathroom, to lock the door and stay there. I didn't want to scare her, but I must have looked terrified because she didn't ask questions. She just did what I said. I ran to the bedroom and got the gun from under the bed. My hands were shaking as I checked it, loaded it, and made sure the safety was off. I went back to the front door and locked it, every deadbolt, every chain. I stood there, heart pounding, listening. I could hear footsteps outside. Slow, steady, coming across the lawn. My breath caught in my throat. I raised the gun, aimed it at the door, not sure what I was expecting. Then came the knock. Not loud, not forceful. Just a knock. I didn't want to open the door. I didn't want to see who it was. I felt my mouth go dry. My voice shook as I yelled out that I had a gun, that I'd called the police, that whoever it was needed to leave. I meant it. I was ready to protect my family if I had to. There was silence for a moment. Then, through the door, I heard this voice. It didn't sound threatening. It sounded confused. Scared, even. The voice said I'd forgotten my fried rice. I stood there for a second, not sure I'd heard right. I lowered the gun a little, my hands still shaking. I peeked out the window. There, standing on my porch, was a delivery driver holding a bag of food. Same guy who'd handed me the order inside the restaurant, I realized. Same uniform. Same face. I opened the door a crack, enough to see him, but not enough to let him in. He looked nervous, his eyes wide like he didn't know why I'd yelled at him. He held out the bag with the rice. I took it, muttered a thank you, and closed the door again. My heart was still racing, the adrenaline still coursing through me. I stood there for a long minute, just breathing, trying to calm down. I put the gun down, went to the bathroom, and told my wife everything was okay. I felt embarrassed, sure, but more than that, I felt relief. The danger I thought was there hadn't been danger at all. Just a guy trying to do his job, trying to get my attention before I drove off without the rest of my food. Later that night, after we'd eaten and the house was quiet again, I lay in bed thinking about it all. I thought about how easy it was for fear to take over, how fast my mind had jumped to the worst possible conclusion. I kept going over every moment, every choice I'd made. I was glad, in the end, that I hadn't pulled the trigger, that I hadn't hurt someone who didn't deserve it. It was a lesson, I guess. A reminder that not everything that feels like a threat is one. That sometimes, in the dark, with your heart racing and your mind full of worry, it's easy to see danger where there isn't any. I still check the locks at night. I still keep the gun under the bed. But I try now to take a breath, to think before I act, to see things clearly. And every time I get takeout, I make sure I have the full order before I leave. I was 16 years old when this happened, living with my dad in a small, older house that creaked at night and had that kind of quiet that somehow made every sound feel louder than it should have been. It wasn't like we lived out in the middle of nowhere or anything, but it was one of those neighborhoods where the houses had been around for decades. The kind where the floors were worn down from years of footsteps and the walls held onto the smell of old wood and dust. My room was at the end of the hallway, small but comfortable. I had my bed tucked up against one wall with a narrow window beside it, covered by old blinds that never really sat straight, always tilted in some weird angle that let in strips of moonlight at night. There was a small closet across from the bed, the kind with sliding doors that never seemed to want to stay on their track. That night felt pretty normal. I'd stayed up later than I should have, scrolling through my phone, listening to music quietly through my headphones. Eventually, though, I felt my eyelids getting heavy, and I decided it was time to get some sleep. I set my phone down on the nightstand, unplugged my headphones, and just laid there for a little while, listening to the house settle. It was one of those nights where the air felt still, like everything outside had stopped too. The moon was bright enough that it painted pale stripes across my floor and bed through the blinds. I always found that kind of calming. I rolled onto my side, facing the wall, and started letting myself drift off. I don't know how long I'd been laying there, maybe a few minutes, maybe longer, but just as I was starting to relax, I felt it. At first, I thought I was imagining it, just that weird feeling you get sometimes when you're almost asleep. But then it happened again. The mattress shifted, just a little, like someone had sat down at the foot of the bed. And it wasn't just the feeling of the bed moving. There was this soft creak from the box spring, the kind of noise it makes when someone puts their weight on it. My body tensed up right away. I didn't move at first, didn't even breathe. I just laid there, wide-eyed, trying to figure out what the hell was happening. The house was supposed to be empty, just me and my dad, and I knew he was in his room at the other end of the hall. His door was always shut at night, and I hadn't heard it open. Slowly, I half sat up and turned toward the foot of the bed, trying not to make any sudden movements. My heart was pounding so hard in my chest I felt like it was shaking my whole body. The moonlight was bright enough that I could see the edge of the bed and the floor beyond it, but what I saw made my blood run cold. There was a shape, a figure, sitting there. It wasn't clear, Not like I could make out details of a person's face or anything. It was more like a shadow, hunched over, like it was staring at the floor or maybe at the closet. The moonlight coming through the blinds hit it just enough that it looked strange, like the way heat rising off asphalt makes everything behind it shimmer, or how the air looks wavy on a really hot day. Except this was darker, like the shadows were bending around it. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. All I could do was sit there, staring at this thing, trying to make sense of it. It didn't move. It didn't seem like it even noticed me, or if it did, it didn't care. It just sat there, completely still, and for a second, I started to wonder if maybe I was just seeing things. Maybe it was the way the light was coming through the blinds, playing tricks on me. But I could still feel the weight at the end of the bed. It was real. My mattress wasn't just creaking for no reason, and that pressure near my feet wasn't my imagination. I stayed like that for what felt like forever, my eyes locked on it, too scared to look away. My skin was covered in goosebumps, every hair on my body standing on end. My mouth was dry, and I felt like I couldn't even swallow. After what must have been several long minutes, I decided to slowly lay back down, hoping that if I didn't do anything, it would just leave. I kept my eyes on it the whole time as I eased back onto my pillow. It didn't move. It just sat there, facing away from me. I don't know if that made it better or worse. I think part of me was relieved that it wasn't looking at me, but another part of me was terrified that it could turn around at any second. Once I was laying down again, I pulled my blanket up, slowly at first, until it was over my face. I didn't want to lose sight of it, but I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to feel like I had some kind of barrier between me and that thing, even if it was just a thin sheet of fabric. Under the covers, the tears started to come. I wasn't sobbing or making noise, just silent tears that ran down my cheeks and soaked into my pillow. My heart wouldn't slow down. I felt like I couldn't breathe right, like my chest was too tight, and every sound in the room seemed so loud. My own breathing, the creak of the mattress, the faint ticking of the clock on my nightstand. I don't know how long I stayed like that. It felt like hours, but it was probably just a few minutes. Eventually, I felt the weight shift again. That same slow movement as whatever it was stood up or got off the bed. The mattress lifted just a little, and the creak of the box spring was softer this time, like it was trying not to make noise. I kept perfectly still, not daring to move or even peek out. I listened as hard as I could, straining to hear any sound that would tell me where it had gone. There was nothing at first, just that same heavy silence. Then I heard it, a soft jangle, like metal clinking together. It came from the closet. My hangers. They rattled, not loud, but enough that I could hear it clear as day in the quiet room. That was when something in me snapped. I couldn't take not knowing anymore. My fear of seeing it was starting to feel smaller than my fear of not knowing where it was or what it was doing. I threw the covers back and sat up fast, my eyes darting around the room. But it was gone. The bed was empty. The room was empty. The closet doors were still shut, but they didn't look right. One was open just a crack, and on the floor inside, I could see a pile of clothes that hadn't been there before. Clothes that I knew I'd hung up just a couple of days earlier. They'd been yanked down somehow, like someone had been searching through them or grabbed at them on the way out. I sat there for a long time, staring at the closet, half expecting that shadowy figure to come out of it. My hands were shaking so bad I had to grip the edge of the mattress to steady them. I wanted to run to my dad's room, but I couldn't bring myself to move at first. Eventually, though, I did. I got up, every step feeling like it took all the strength I had, and I went to his room. I didn't tell him everything. I just said I'd heard a noise, and he came and checked my room. Of course, there was nothing there. Nothing but the pile of clothes on the closet floor, and the blinds still casting those pale lines across the room. The rest of the night, I barely slept. I kept my light on, sitting up in bed, my back against the wall, watching the room until the sun finally started to come up. I didn't see it again, whatever it was, and nothing like that ever happened again while we lived there. But for months after that night, I couldn't go to sleep without making sure my closet doors were shut tight, and I double-checked the lock on my window, even though I knew it hadn't been opened. Every little creak of the house made my heart jump, and I'd lie awake, listening, waiting for that feeling of weight at the foot of my bed to come back. Looking back, I don't know what I saw. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe I was so tired that I started seeing things that weren't there. But I know what I felt. I know what I heard. And I know that, real or not, it was one of the most terrifying nights of my life. I was 10 years old when my family moved to Thailand. My dad had taken a job there, and we ended up in this big house that felt too large for just the four of us: my mom, dad, my older sister, and me. The house was 2 stories tall, with pale yellow walls that were starting to peel in places and dark wooden floors that creaked no matter how light you tried to step. There was a long balcony that wrapped around the top floor, and out back was a small yard bordered by an old fence. Beyond that fence was just thick, green swamp, stretching out as far as I could see. The air always smelled a little bit damp, a mix of wet earth and plants rotting somewhere far off. Our room was upstairs. My sister and I shared it, which I didn't mind, even if she sometimes acted like she was too old to hang out with me. There was a Jack and Jill bathroom that connected our room to another room, one that was empty. The room on the other side of that bathroom always felt colder than the rest of the house. My mom said it was because of the windows facing the swamp and how the breeze would come in through cracks we couldn't see. I didn't believe that. The house felt weird from the start. We had a maid, because in Thailand, that was pretty normal and didn't cost much. She was a small woman, probably in her 40s, with dark hair she tied back in a tight bun. She was kind enough, but she had this sharp voice that always made me sit up straight when she spoke. She was always scolding us about that empty room. Almost every morning, she'd tell us off for leaving the ceiling fan running in there. But neither my sister nor I ever went in that room. We avoided it. We kept the bathroom door shut on our side. We both swear we never touched the fan. At first, I thought maybe she was just mistaken, or maybe my sister was messing with me. But then, when we were downstairs, we started hearing it. It would usually happen at night, after dinner when we were watching TV or playing cards. We'd hear footsteps running back and forth across the upstairs floor. Sometimes it sounded like more than one person. The footsteps would be light and quick, like kids playing tag. Other times, we'd hear a ball bouncing. It had that hollow sound, soft at first, but clear. And sometimes, after the running stopped, we'd hear what sounded like laughter. Not loud, but enough to freeze me in place. My dad would say it was the house settling. My mom would tell us not to worry. But my sister and I both knew that wasn't what houses settling sounded like. We weren't dumb. It was footsteps. It was a ball. It was laughter. It didn't sound like wood creaking or pipes clanging. And it always came from that empty room. One night, my sister asked if our friend could sleep over. Her name was Molly, and she was always up for anything fun or scary. We thought maybe with her there, it wouldn't feel so creepy. We decided to build a blanket fort in that empty room. We dragged in pillows from our room and stacked them up along the walls. We tied sheets to the corners of the wardrobe and the window frame, pulling them tight to make a tent. We brought in a flashlight and a couple of snacks. I remember sitting there, feeling kind of excited, because with the 3 of us together, the room didn't feel so bad at first. It was hot that night. The air was sticky, even with the fan in our room going full blast. In that empty room, it felt even hotter, like no air moved at all. We turned off the main light and kept just the flashlight on, shining it up at the ceiling, letting it make shadows that danced along the walls of our little tent. We talked about school, about boys, about movies we liked. For a little while, I forgot about how weird the house felt. Then, out of nowhere, we heard it. A soft scratching sound. It was coming from the wall just behind where I was sitting. At first, I thought maybe it was a rat or something. This was Thailand, after all. But it didn't stop. It kept going, slow and steady, like fingernails dragging over the wood. My heart started pounding. None of us said a word. I could feel Molly and my sister freeze beside me. We sat there, not even breathing, just listening. The scratching stopped. I was about to say something, maybe laugh it off. That's when the doors of the wardrobe creaked open. The sound of the hinges was so loud in the quiet room. The doors didn't swing wide, just enough that we could see the dark gap inside. That was it for us. We didn't wait to see anything else. We grabbed the flashlight, kicked aside the pillows, and ran for the door. We didn't even look back. We ran through the bathroom, into our room, and down the stairs, our feet slamming on the wood so hard I thought we'd wake the whole house. We didn't go back up that night. We stayed on the couch in the living room, blankets pulled around us, eyes wide open. My dad came out once, telling us to quiet down, but we didn't explain. What could we say that would make sense? The next morning, we went up with the maid when she started her cleaning. She gave us a funny look when she saw all our pillows and blankets scattered in that room. She told us off again about the ceiling fan, which was spinning slowly even though we hadn't touched it. After that, we avoided the empty room completely. We kept the bathroom door locked on our side. At night, the sounds kept coming. Running, bouncing, laughing. The maid started locking the door to that room from the hallway, but somehow the fan would still be on in the morning. It became part of our life there, like the damp smell from the swamp or the hum of the insects outside. One day, a few weeks after the wardrobe incident, I was in the backyard kicking a ball around. An older man from the village came by. He stopped at the fence and watched me for a bit, then asked if we were the family living in the big house. I said yes. He nodded, looking serious. Then he pointed beyond the fence, toward the swamp. His voice was low, but I heard every word. He said that a long time ago, people used to throw things they didn't want into that swamp. Junk, garbage, sometimes animals, sometimes worse. Babies, he said. Unwanted babies. People would leave them there, thinking no one would know. But the swamp keeps secrets, he said, and sometimes the things left there don't stay quiet. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, holding my ball, feeling cold even though the sun was hot on my face. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the swamp, about what might be buried under that dark water. I thought about the sounds we heard at night, about the wardrobe door swinging open on its own. I wondered if somehow what had happened in that swamp had left something behind. Not ghosts, not spirits, but something else. A memory, maybe. A kind of sadness that settled into the walls of our house, that echoed in the empty room upstairs. We lived in that house for another year before my dad's job moved us again. The day we left, I stood at the edge of the backyard and looked out at the swamp one last time. The water was still. The trees leaned over it like they were keeping watch. I didn't feel scared, not really. Just sad. I thought about the sounds I'd heard, the stories the man told me. I thought about how some places remember what people try to forget. And I hoped that whatever was left in that swamp, it would find peace one day. We moved to a smaller house in another part of the country. It didn't have the creaky floors or the empty room with the cold air. It didn't have the swamp at the back either. At night, the only sounds were the wind in the trees or the occasional dog barking in the distance. I never heard running footsteps or bouncing balls again. And I never forgot that house, the one with the empty room and the swamp beyond the fence. It was a quiet night, colder than I expected for that time of year. The kind of cold that creeps into your bones, not just from the air, but from the way the empty station seemed to breathe. I stood under one of those yellow street lamps on the platform, hands buried deep in my jacket pockets, waiting for my train. The light flickered now and then, casting odd shadows across the cracked concrete. The only sound was the faint hum of the overhead wires and the distant rustle of the wind pushing discarded wrappers and leaves across the tracks. I kept glancing down the platform, watching the darkness beyond, hoping to see the familiar glow of the train headlights. My eyes were heavy from the long day. It had been one of those days where everything felt heavier than it should, and all I wanted was to get home, crawl into bed, and leave the world behind for a few hours. That's when I noticed him. He was far at first, just a figure stepping out from the shadows at the far end of the platform. Tall, taller than most people I knew, and thin but not in a sickly way. He moved with purpose, but also like he was struggling. The street lamp light didn't quite reach him yet, but I could see he was carrying something. A suitcase. It looked big, almost too big for him. As he drew closer, the light hit him, and that's when my unease started to grow. The suitcase wasn't just big. It looked like it was weighing him down. His arm trembled slightly with each step, and the bag swung awkwardly at his side. I squinted, realizing there was something off about the suitcase itself. From one of the corners, I saw liquid dripping steadily onto the concrete, leaving dark splashes that glistened under the lamp. It wasn't water. Even from where I stood, I could tell it was thicker, maybe oil or something else. The smell hit me as he got closer, sharp and metallic, like rust mixed with something sour. The man himself was a mess. His clothes were rumpled and filthy, covered in dirt that caked his trousers and jacket all the way up to his chest. His face, what I could see of it beneath a tangled mess of hair and grime, was streaked with sweat and dirt. His forearms were exposed, and I could see cuts, some fresh and still oozing, others scabbed over. His knuckles looked raw, like he'd been dragging that suitcase for miles. I tried not to stare, but he was heading straight for me, his eyes dark and hard, locked on mine. There was something in his expression, something that set every nerve on edge. His mouth moved before he even stopped in front of me, his voice harsh, the words coming out clipped and slurred. He ordered me to take the suitcase. There was no politeness, no hesitation, just that tone that said he wasn't asking. It was aggressive, almost desperate, and it made my heart start to race. I didn't know what was in the suitcase, but I didn't want anything to do with it. My stomach turned just looking at the dark fluid dripping out of it. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out at first. My throat felt dry, like I hadn't had a drink in hours. Finally, I managed to shake my head and mutter a weak sorry. My feet moved before I even thought about it, carrying me back a step, then another. I didn't want to run, not yet. I didn't want to provoke him, but every part of me screamed to get away from this man. He followed. His steps quickened, and he kept talking, but I couldn't make sense of the words anymore. They were garbled, rushed, his voice rising and falling like he was arguing with himself as much as with me. I didn't look at the suitcase again. I focused on the tracks, on the edge of the platform, praying for the lights of the train to appear. The tension in the air felt unbearable, like the moment before a storm breaks. Then I heard it, the faint rumble, the soft clatter of steel on steel. The train. Relief flooded through me so fast it made me dizzy. I moved faster, my pace almost a jog now, keeping my eyes on the approaching headlights, the promise of safety. The man was still behind me, still following, still muttering those strange, broken sentences. I didn't turn to look at him. I didn't want to see his face anymore. The train pulled in, slowing with that familiar screech of brakes. I moved toward the nearest door, pressing the button with shaking fingers. It felt like the longest few seconds of my life, waiting for the door to slide open. The man was close now, close enough that I could hear his breathing, ragged, uneven, like he'd been running for miles. The smell of him, of dirt and sweat, and that strange metallic tang, filled my nose. Finally, the door opened. I stepped inside, almost tripping over my own feet in my hurry. The man reached out as if he was going to follow, but before he could, the door started to slide shut again. His face was right there, inches from the glass, his eyes wide and wild, his mouth still moving, yelling words I couldn't understand. His hand smacked the window once, then curled into a fist. He punched it hard, the sound making me jump, the glass trembling under the force but not breaking. The train began to move, slowly at first. His fist hit the window again, but softer this time, like he knew it was useless. He kept his eyes locked on mine as the platform slid past, his face fading into the night. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed him was his mouth still moving, still yelling, still desperate. I sank into the nearest seat, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The other passengers stared at me, confused, some concerned, others just annoyed at the noise. I couldn't speak. I just sat there, trying to calm my breathing, trying to process what had just happened. The train rocked gently as it picked up speed, carrying me away from that station, from that man, from whatever nightmare I'd just stepped out of. For the next few stops, I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see him running along the tracks, that suitcase still dragging behind him. But there was nothing. Just empty platforms, dark fields, and the lights of distant houses. When I finally got off at my stop, I felt like I'd been holding my breath the entire journey. The night air was cold, but it felt cleaner, safer somehow. I kept looking over my shoulder as I walked home, every sound making me jump, every shadow making my heart skip. When I finally got inside, I locked the door, double-checked the windows, and sat down in the living room, still in my coat, still shaking. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, those eyes, that suitcase dripping with something I didn't want to think about. I thought about calling someone, maybe the police, but what would I say? That some stranger tried to make me take his bag? That he looked dangerous? It didn't feel like enough. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I wasn't. Days passed, but it stayed with me. I kept seeing him in my head, kept wondering what was in that suitcase, kept hearing the sound of his fist hitting the glass. Even now, every time I'm at a station, I find myself scanning the platform, watching the shadows, waiting for some figure to step out of the dark, suitcase in hand, eyes locked on mine. And I don't think that feeling will ever really go away. We were just trying to have a good night. It was one of those cold nights where the air feels sharp when you breathe, and your fingers start to go numb even if you've only been outside for a few minutes. I remember pulling my jacket tighter around me as we walked. I had gone out with two of my good friends, both guys I'd known for years. We weren't planning anything crazy, just heading to a bar we liked that was only about a mile from where we started. At first, it felt fine walking. We were laughing, talking, doing that thing where you walk fast just to keep warm. But it didn't take long before we all started realizing how bitter the cold really was. It wasn't just cold, it was the kind of cold that made your nose sting and your teeth ache. Our faces were red, our breath came out in big white clouds, and every gust of wind felt like it was cutting right through our clothes. It was somewhere around a quarter of the way there that one of us, I can't even remember who, said it out loud, that we should just get a cab. We all agreed immediately. None of us wanted to admit how miserable we were, but as soon as someone said it, it was like we couldn't get off the street fast enough. And as luck would have it, we spotted a cab right then, parked in the lot of a Royal Farms. The cab wasn't moving, and when we got closer, we could see the driver inside, had leaned back like he was taking a nap or waiting for a fare. We figured we'd wake him up, get in, and be at the bar in no time. One of the guys tapped on the window, and the driver jerked awake, looking groggy. His face was kind of in the shadows, so I didn't really get a good look at him. He gave a quick nod and motioned for us to get in. We didn't think anything of it. We were just relieved to be getting out of the cold. I ended up in the middle of the back seat, squeezed between my friends. The inside of the cab was warm, smelled a little like stale coffee and cigarettes. It felt good to be out of the wind, and for a few seconds, we all just sat back and let ourselves thaw out. The cab pulled out of the lot, and right away something fell off. He didn't pull into the lane we expected. Instead, he swung out into the lane with traffic going the opposite direction of where we were headed. We all kind of looked at each other. At first, I thought maybe he was going to turn around or had to loop around to head the right way. But he didn't. He kept going, and then he started weaving between the lanes in this slow, lazy-esque pattern. It was like he wasn't really paying attention, or he was messing with us, or maybe he was drunk. There weren't any cars coming toward us, thank God, but it was terrifying all the same. None of us were laughing anymore. The mood in the car changed fast. My heart was pounding. I kept looking out the windows, expecting to see headlights barreling toward us. We spoke up, said we wanted to get out, that we'd just walk the rest of the way. We didn't want to be in that car anymore. The driver didn't say anything. He just kept driving, weaving back and forth. I could feel the tension in my friends on either side of me, how stiff they were sitting now. Finally, we came up to a red light. The cab slowed and stopped. Without saying a word, my friends threw open their doors and jumped out. I started to move over, trying to slide across the seat, so I could get out too. But before I could get both feet out, the driver slammed on the gas. He shot forward, straight through the red light. My body was half in, half out of the car. My right foot was braced on the door to keep it from closing, because I had this horrible feeling that if that door shut, he'd lock it, and I'd be trapped. Everything happened so fast, but it also felt like slow motion. The wind was howling past me as the car sped up. My hair was whipping around my face, my heart beating so loud I could hear it in my ears. I was screaming, just screaming at the top of my lungs. I wasn't thinking about anything except that I couldn't let that door close. My hands were gripping the edge of the seat, my foot was wedged against the door, and the cold air kept slamming into me as we sped through the streets. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see my friends running after the cab. They were shouting, throwing whatever they could grab at the car, bottles, rocks, anything they could get their hands on. But we were moving too fast. The driver didn't slow down. If anything, he sped up. I could see the lights of the city blurring past, streetlights streaking by, the pavement flashing under the open door. Then, just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, he swung the car hard to the right. There were cars parked all along the side of the road, and he plowed into them. The sound was deafening, metal scraping metal, glass shattering. I felt the jolt of the impact all the way through my body. The side of the car where my leg was braced slammed into the parked cars. My foot slipped, but somehow the door stayed open. Pain shot through my leg, but I didn't have time to think about it. We hit car after car. It felt like it would never end, like we were smashing through the whole block. And then, finally, we came to another red light. There was a car stopped in front of us, and for just a second, the cab couldn't go anywhere. I saw my chance. The door on my side wouldn't budge, probably jammed from hitting all those cars, but I scrambled across the seat, lunged for the driver's side door, and threw myself out onto the street. My knees hit the pavement hard, and I rolled, scraping my hands and arms. Before I was even fully upright, the light changed, and the cab sped off, disappearing into the night. My friends were there in seconds, out of breath, wide-eyed, helping me up. My leg was throbbing, and when I looked down, I could see the dark bruises already starting to form where the cars had slammed into us. But I was out. I was safe. I kept shaking, couldn't stop shaking. We tried to get a picture of the license plate, but the only one we managed to snap was too blurry to read. We called 911, told them everything, what the cab looked like, what happened, where we were. The police came, took our statements. I don't know if they ever found him. I never heard anything after that night. What I do know is that I didn't sleep much for a long time after that. I kept seeing it in my head, the cab weaving through the lanes, the parked cars getting closer and closer, the doors swinging open with the street rushing past. I kept thinking how easily it could have gone differently. If that door had closed, if there had been oncoming traffic, if I hadn't made it out in time. My leg healed eventually, though the bruises were some of the worst I've ever had. But the fear took longer to go away. Even now, when I see a cab parked on the side of the road, or I get into one, I can feel my heart start to race. That night taught me how fast things can go from normal to nightmare, how thin the line is between being safe and being in real danger. I've never looked at cabs the same way since, and I don't think I ever will. When I was 13, I experienced something I've carried with me my whole life. I don't talk about it much, but when I do, the memory comes back so clearly it's like I'm there again. It all started a couple of years after my grandmother passed away. She died quietly one afternoon while napping on the living room couch. It wasn't dramatic or drawn out. She just went to sleep and didn't wake up. I remember the day it happened. The house was quiet in a strange way, like it knew something important had just ended. That couch, with its faded fabric and flattened cushions, became something more than just a piece of furniture after that. It became the place where she left us. After she passed, my dad and grandfather would sometimes talk about how they thought she still visited the house. They said they could hear her at night, making that familiar trip from the bedroom down the hall to the kitchen, opening the refrigerator door, just like she always did when she wanted a cold drink. They'd tell me about it with these strange smiles, like they were sharing a private joke, or maybe trying to spook me. At first, I thought they were just messing with me, trying to get a rise out of me because I was the youngest. I never took them seriously. I figured they were remembering her so much that they started imagining things. Grief does that sometimes, I guess. It wasn't until that one weekend that I understood what they meant. My dad and I had gone to visit my grandfather. It was just a regular visit, nothing out of the ordinary. My grandfather lived in the same house where my grandmother had died. The house hadn't changed much. Same furniture, same old photos on the walls, same smells of wood and old cooking grease. That weekend, my grandfather decided to go next door to the neighbor's house to play poker. It wasn't unusual. He did that sometimes to pass the time. My dad and I stayed behind. That night, my dad and I slept on the couch in the living room. The couch folded out into a bed, big enough for the two of us. It was the same couch my grandmother had died on. My dad fell asleep pretty quickly, snoring softly after only a few minutes. I wasn't tired yet. I had brought a magazine with me, so I lay on my side, flipping through the pages while listening to the sounds of the house settling for the night. The house was quiet except for the faint ticking of the wall clock and the occasional groan of the wooden frame as it adjusted to the night air. I don't know how long I had been reading when I heard it, the sound of the back bedroom door being pulled open. The door made a low creaking noise, the kind that sticks with you once you hear it in a quiet house. Then I heard soft shuffling, the sound of feet sliding along the floorboards. It wasn't hurried or loud, just slow, familiar, steady steps. The floor creaked in front of the bathroom doorway, exactly where it always did when someone walked by. I heard more of the slow shuffling, and then the unmistakable sound of the refrigerator door being pulled open. There was a slight suction sound as the seal gave way, followed by the clink of glass bottles knocking against each other. Back then, soft drinks still came in glass bottles, and my grandfather always kept a few in the fridge. I paused, listening carefully. Everything sounded so normal, so routine, like any other night when my grandfather would get up for a cold drink. I didn't feel scared at that moment. I actually felt a bit thirsty myself, so I decided to get up and join him in the kitchen. I figured maybe we could share a soda. I pushed the blanket off and stood, the cool floor sending a little shiver up my legs. I made my way quietly to the kitchen, expecting to see my grandfather standing there with the fridge door open, maybe holding a bottle of soda or milk. But when I got there, the kitchen was empty. The fridge was closed. The room was dark except for a bit of moonlight coming through the window above the sink. The bottles in the fridge door were still clinking faintly, as if they'd just been disturbed. I stood there for a moment, confused, listening. The house felt still again, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator motor kicking on. I glanced around, half expecting my grandfather to appear from the shadows, but there was no one. And then it hit me. My grandfather wasn't home. He was still next door playing cards. I had watched him leave earlier. That realization made the room feel colder. I thought about the stories my dad and grandfather had told me, about hearing my grandmother's footsteps, the fridge door opening, those familiar nightly sounds. The air seemed heavier suddenly. I felt a tight knot form in my stomach, and my skin prickled. I backed out of the kitchen slowly, my ears straining for any new sound. When nothing came, I turned and hurried back into the living room. I didn't walk around the couch. I leaped right over my dad, landing on my side of the bed and pulling the blanket up over my head. My heart was pounding in my ears, and I lay there for a long time listening, waiting for something else to happen. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep, but the night wasn't done with me yet. I woke up suddenly, my eyes snapping open in the darkness. I didn't know what time it was, but the house was still, and my dad was still sleeping beside me, his breathing deep and even. I realized right away that something felt wrong. My whole body felt frozen, like I was paralyzed by fear. I was lying on my right side, and I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. It took what felt like forever for me to build up the courage to move. I knew I had to look, but I didn't want to. Finally, I forced myself to turn my head slightly to the left. My blanket was pulled up over my head, but I could see a shadow through the thin fabric. It was the outline of a head and shoulders, a woman's shape. The head had a rounded shape on top, like a beehive hairdo. My grandmother had always worn her hair like that, even long after it went out of style. The shadow didn't move. I could hear slow, heavy breathing coming from where the shadow stood, steady and deep. I lay there, frozen, listening to that breathing. I wanted to scream, to wake my dad, but my voice wouldn't come. I finally managed to move my hand, inching it up slowly to pull the blanket down. As soon as I did, the shadow was gone. The breathing stopped. The room was just a room again. My dad was still asleep, undisturbed by any of it. I pulled the blanket back over my head, my body still shaking, and tried to force myself to sleep. But it didn't end there. Not that night. I woke again later, lying on my right side, that same paralyzing fear back like a weight on my chest. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I turned my head, saw the same shadow through the blanket, heard the same breathing. Again, I forced my hand to pull the blanket down. Again, the shadow disappeared, the breathing stopped, and the fear lifted like it had never been there. I must have gone through that routine a dozen times, or more that night. Each time, I hoped it would be the last. Each time, it wasn't. The night dragged on, the house staying silent except for those moments when I'd wake to that awful fear and that familiar shadow. The minutes felt like hours. The hours felt like days. The room felt colder every time I woke, like the warmth was being drained out of it little by little. I don't know how I finally fell asleep for good, but I must have, because the next thing I knew, light was streaming in through the curtains, and the house was alive again with morning sounds. My dad was up, moving around quietly, so he wouldn't wake me. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that the night had really happened the way I remembered it. I didn't tell my dad about it right away. I wasn't sure how to explain it without sounding crazy, but as we were having breakfast, the words just spilled out. I told him everything, about the sounds of the bedroom door opening, the shuffling feet, the fridge door, the empty kitchen, about waking up over and over with that horrible fear, seeing the shadow, hearing the breathing. I told him how it kept happening, how I kept pulling down the blanket and finding nothing there, how I spent the night trapped in that cycle, too scared to move, too scared to sleep, too scared to stay awake. My dad listened without interrupting. When I finished, he didn't try to explain it away. He didn't tell me I imagined it, or that it was just a dream. He just nodded, like he understood exactly what I'd been through. We didn't talk about it much after that. The house went back to being just a house. We visited my grandfather many times after that weekend, but I never slept in the living room again. I never wanted to be near that couch at night. Looking back on it now, I don't think it was a ghost in the way people usually mean. There was no glowing figure, no floating woman, no cold hand reaching out. It was something else. The house was old, full of sounds and memories. My grandmother had lived her whole life in that house, walked those floors, opened that fridge 1,000 times. Maybe somehow, the house just held on to those patterns, those routines. Maybe I was young and scared, and my mind filled in the blanks in the dark. Or maybe there are things about places, about the people we love and lose, that we don't fully understand. But one thing I do know is this: that night was real. The fear was real. The sounds were real. And I'll never forget the way it felt, lying there under that blanket, listening to the breathing of someone who wasn't supposed to be there. My dad used to tell this story a lot when I was a kid, usually when we were out camping or sitting around a fire. He wasn't the type to try to scare people for fun, but this was something that stayed with him, something he said he would never forget no matter how much time passed. Every time he told it, I could see the seriousness in his eyes, and I could tell it wasn't just some tale to entertain me or my siblings. He believed every word of it, and by the time he was done talking, so did I. Back in the 1970s, before I was born, my dad worked as a trail guide in California. He was in his 20s then, full of energy, and he loved the outdoors. He spent his days leading groups of tourists on horseback across the mountain trails. The place he worked at wasn't anything fancy, just a small riding outfit near the edge of some wild country in central California. There were rolling hills, rocky outcrops, and stretches of chaparral that seemed to go on forever. It was the kind of place where the wind carried the scent of dry grass, and the sun baked the land until it shimmered in the heat. He met all sorts of people while working there, folks from the cities who wanted a taste of the wild, families on vacation, and sometimes people who seemed to be running from something. One of those people was a Native American man who came around first as a customer. My dad never told me his name, maybe because he didn't know it, or maybe because he wanted to keep that part private. The guy was probably in his 30s, quiet, but friendly. He had long black hair that he usually kept tied back and dark eyes that seemed to always be watching, always measuring. He didn't talk much about where he came from. My dad only knew that he was from a reservation somewhere, but the man never said which one, and my dad never asked. He figured it wasn't his business. All he knew was that the man was good company and seemed to enjoy being out on the trails. Eventually, the guy started working there. He was good with horses, calm and patient, and he knew his way around the land. He never said why he left his home or what brought him out to that part of California. My dad said he always figured it was something personal, something the man didn't want to talk about, and he respected that. One day, my dad, his brother, my uncle, and the Native American friend were leading a group of tourists along one of the trails. It was the kind of warm, dry day that was typical of that part of the state, the kind where the sun beats down on your back and the air smells of dust and sage. The group was in good spirits. My dad and my uncle were cracking jokes back and forth like they always did, and their friend was laughing along with them, his usual quiet self loosened up a bit by the mood. The tourists were snapping pictures with their big cameras, the kind that needed film, and everyone seemed to be enjoying the ride. They were riding along a trail that ran near a wide field, with a shallow valley on the left side. It was the kind of place where you might see deer, or maybe a coyote if you were lucky. Sure enough, as they moved along, somebody pointed out into the valley and called out that they saw a coyote. My dad said it didn't seem like anything unusual at first. Coyotes were common enough out there. They'd see them now and then, usually trotting along in the distance, minding their own business. They stopped the horses so the tourists could take some pictures. My dad started talking with his friend about something, I don't know what, and my uncle kept his eyes on the coyote. After a minute, my uncle spoke up, saying that the coyote didn't look right. My dad asked what he meant, and my uncle said that it didn't move like a normal coyote. It had long, skinny legs that seemed too thin for its body, and it walked funny. Most dogs, he said, move by lifting a front leg and the opposite back leg at the same time, but this thing moved both legs on one side of its body together, kind of like a camel. Its snout was longer than it should have been, and it kept its nose pointed up, like it was sniffing for something on the wind. My dad didn't think much of it. He figured it was just a coyote with some kind of deformity, maybe born that way or hurt at some point. My uncle agreed after a moment, but their friend didn't say a word. He was staring at the coyote, and my dad noticed that he had started to shiver, just slightly. It wasn't cold out, not at all. My dad put a hand on his shoulder, trying to calm him down, and asked what was wrong. That's when the man raised a hand, his finger pointing at the coyote, and said, "The tail. Look at the tail." My dad looked, and at first, he didn't get it. Then it hit him. The coyote didn't have a tail. Not a short one, not a stub, not a ragged bit where one had been torn off, just nothing. No sign that a tail had ever been there at all. My dad said that was the moment when something about the situation started to feel off to him too. He couldn't say exactly why, but looking at that animal, it just didn't feel right. The friend wouldn't say anything more. He just muttered that he'd explain later, when they were back at camp. My dad figured that was fair enough, so they got the tourists moving again. But the coyote kept following them. It didn't come up from the valley, just stayed along the edge of it, keeping pace with the group. The tourists thought it was neat, having this wild animal along for the ride, but my dad's friend wouldn't look at it. He kept his eyes forward, silent and tense. They were maybe a couple hundred yards from camp when the coyote did something that made everybody jump. It suddenly burst out of the underbrush, right in front of the group. The horses spooked, rearing up and snorting. My dad and uncle managed to calm them down, but the tourists were rattled, their easy mood gone in an instant. The coyote just stood there, looking at them. No, my dad said, it wasn't looking at them. It was looking at the friend. And then it smiled. Not the kind of open-mouthed panting dogs do when they're hot, but an actual smile, showing its teeth. Yellow teeth, stained and dirty. The friend stared back at it, and after a second, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of wood. My dad hadn't noticed it before. It was about the size of a matchbox, and it had an arrow burned into it. The friend held it up, showing the face of it to the coyote. The animal, or whatever it was, turned its head away. Then it made a sound. Coyotes usually have this high, yipping howl, but this was different. It was low, deep, almost like a man groaning, but drawn out into a howl. It sounded sick, like it had water in its lungs. My dad said it was one of the most awful sounds he'd ever heard. When it finished, the thing turned and loped back into the brush, disappearing from sight. My uncle tried to break the tension, joking that he hoped the tourists felt like they got their money's worth, but nobody laughed. Back at camp, the friend finally spoke, though he wouldn't give them much. He said that the thing had killed before, and that now it would try to kill him. He said it was better that my dad and uncle didn't know too much, that knowing more would only bring trouble their way. Before he left, he handed them each a small piece of wood like the one he'd shown the coyote, with an arrow burned into it. He said it would keep them safe. Then he packed up his things, got into his truck, and drove off. My dad never saw him again. That was the end of it as far as events went. But my dad would always say that sometimes on cold nights, when the wind was just right, he could hear that low, sick-sounding howl, faint and far away, but there. And he'd find himself holding the little piece of wood, even though he didn't remember reaching for it. Over the years, he kept that piece of wood with him. It stayed in his pack whenever he was out camping, tucked into a pocket or wrapped in a bandana. I remember seeing it once when I was a kid. It didn't look like much, just a bit of old wood, with a simple arrow burned into the surface. But the way my dad handled it, like it was something precious, told me it mattered. He said he never saw that strange coyote again, but he never forgot it either. He never tried to explain it beyond what he'd already told. I think he didn't want to think too much about it. He wasn't a superstitious man, not really. But that day, something happened out there that didn't fit into any of the neat little boxes of logic or reason that he liked to keep the world in. And as for the friend, he never came back. My dad tried once or twice to find out what happened to him, asking around some of the other riding outfits and checking with a few people he knew, but no one had seen him. It was like he'd just vanished, driven off into the night and disappeared. Years later, long after my dad had stopped working as a guide and had moved on with his life, he still kept that piece of wood. He kept it in a drawer by his bed, along with a few other keepsakes. He said he never wanted to throw it out, just in case. And sometimes, when the wind would howl through the trees on a winter night, he'd sit up in bed and listen, his ears straining for that deep, sick howl. He said he hadn't heard it in a long time, but he always listened, just the same.